What if the Cullens attended Hogwarts? Part 8. I was right. Did my jaw hit the floor? I had absolutely no idea. I was too busy gawking at the cathedral-sized hall I was standing in, the walls of which, along with the 2 rows of supporting columns, were made entirely of gold. The resplendent decor, however, wasn't the most astonishing feature by far. Despite the fast car and the multiple offshore bank accounts, I was no materialist. Wealth and treasure were not fundamental to my happiness. Contained within the chamber, reaching a staggering height of 70 feet, was the largest sphinx I had ever seen in my entire existence. Every part of the colossal monolith was intricately sculpted and entirely undamaged, unlike the monument still standing on the Giza Plateau. That, of course, was only to be expected, when one considered the phenomenal shelter protecting it from weathering and erosion. The sphinx lay flat on her belly, the proud head of a woman supported by the powerful body of a lion. I wanted to say something to translate my wonder into speech, but the words got lodged in my throat, blocked by an overwhelming sense of amazement. Emmett was the first to approach the sphinx. Her ancient, limestone eyes stared on blindly, and, yet, they were still, somehow, piercing and severe. I found myself relieved that they weren't cast down. Jasper chuckled beside me. Nervous, Edward? No more than you, brother, I answered wryly, listening to his thoughts. Emmett, who was too absorbed with the discovery, failed to pay the exchange much notice. What could possibly motivate someone to build a sphinx this size beneath a school? And in Britain? Interesting questions, I agreed. The sphinx was never a part of the native mythology. Who says they re-mythological? He answered with his back to me. Point taken. He reached out carefully to touch the creature's paw, urged by a building fascination that only physical contact could satisfy. I held my breath as his skin brushed the stone. Why I was so on edge, I had absolutely no idea. Still, I was tense enough that a moment later, when I decided my brother's raging curiosity wasn't about to awaken the beast, I sighed heavily with relief. The sound of Jasper's ensuing mirth echoed down the chamber again. Light reflected off his skin and teeth in a peculiar way, seeming to cast a subtle golden aura about him. Unlike before, his laughter was light and airy, having lost its initial nervous undertone. This time, Emmett joined in, as did I. With our guard lowered, none of us were prepared for the cavernous roar that exploded suddenly through the hall, like the deep rumble of an earthquake. It drowned out our cheerful chorus, and had each of us crouching defensively, ready to attack if the situation called for it. Emmett was lightning quick as he bolted back to my side, aligning himself with Jasper and me. The sphinx tossed and rolled her head, emitting a snarl that shook the pillars of her golden home. As she did, her stone skin began to fragment, splitting and crumbling over and over, until it resembled the cracked terrain of a desert, and then, inexplicably, the rock dissolved, leaving behind a remnant limy haze, enshrouded in which was the newly hatched creature herself. My brothers and I, 3 flies in the den of a spider, stared up at the angry sphinx like deer caught in the headlights. She returned our disbelieving gazes with a furious glare, her eyes as golden and fiery as the blazing sun. Her hair was as black as jet, and looked as silky as spider thread. It fell down over her shoulders, where bronzed human skin met with her lion coat. She's looking at us like we re-breakfast, Jasper panicked, feeding of our collective fear. I wanted to remind him that we were vampires, but I wasn't entirely sure what that counted for anymore, especially when you were facing an ancient monster a third the size of Godzilla. The sphinx was bigger than us. Was she stronger too? Did my species really sit at the top of the food chain, or were we all suffering from total ignorance yet again? Should we introduce ourselves? Emmett whispered, so low that even I had trouble hearing. Don't bother. The sphinx snapped, her shimmering lips curling back. I already know who you are. The sound of her voice left me momentarily disarmed, and I straightened out of my predatory crouch. Even whilst it was tinged with anger, it possessed an incredibly pleasant texture, warm, thick, and rich, like treacle or chocolate syrup. Why are you here? She spat. What do you want? Because I could hear both of my brother's thoughts, I nominated myself to act as speaker. We discovered the entrance by accident, I admitted, stepping forwards, uncertain as to whether I should look her in the eye. Carefully, I peeked at her from beneath my lashes. We just wanted to know where the tunnel led. When I fully met the sphinx's majestic gaze, I couldn't decide whether the sense of inferiority that suddenly washed through me was my own doing, or the result of some strange magic. Whatever the cause, I felt an overwhelming impulse to appease the creature, who was now looking down at Jasper, Emmett and me in the same way a human might observe three annoying insects. Because it was second nature, I searched for a new mind, unable to stop myself. Aside from those of my brothers, though, all I detected in that enormous, subterranean lair was a high-pitched ringing, similar to the sonar of a bat, only this was even higher, barely discernible. As I'd once said to Bella, perhaps it was possible for minds to work on two separate frequencies. House elves were on the AM channel. Did that apply to sphinxes as well? You re-trespassing, the creature stated matter-of-factly, which means you re-obligated to answer my riddle. If you refuse, or you produce the wrong answer, I'll attack. She flashed a menacing smile, revealing 2 rows of pearly, white teeth. Her canines were sharp and elongated, like those of the stereotypical vampire. They glistened threateningly in the light, a silent warning of the potentially massive danger that we 3 immortals had placed ourselves in. What riddle? The Sphinx's smile widened. I creep up on my victims, sometimes swiftly, others slowly, for I am always patient, or so they say. No creature can outrun me. Some choose to fight, but I always win, even though I am blind. Men will kill for me. I have killed many a man, for I have lived since the dawn of time and, yet, I am not indestructible. If I don't die young though, I will probably live forever. What am I? The Sphinx crossed her front paws, lounging leisurely as she awaited our answer. My brothers and I, meanwhile, traded looks of bewilderment. Are we allowed to confer? Jasper questioned. Your brother's a mind reader, isn't he? I am sure he can pick out a suitable answer without disturbing the quiet. My teeth slammed together, grinding furiously. Great. Not only had the Sphinx placed the responsibility of averting violence solely on my shoulders, she also flaunted her insight right in our faces, wearing an expression of supreme smugness all the while. How could she possibly know of my abilities unless she was a mind reader herself? Jasper and Emmett repeated the riddle in their heads over and over, sifting through all their accumulated knowledge and memories for the correct answer. No creature can outrun me, thought Emmett. A vampire, surely, and we are immortal, after all, so that fits with the bit about living forever. That part made sense. Unfortunately, I've never met a blind vampire. The 2 of us sighed together in frustration. Jasper, on the other hand, was compiling a list of all the things humans would kill for. Good looks, money, power, religion. What is blind? I wondered. What is blind that men will kill for? What would I kill for? Bella. Bella, what is blind that I stiffened suddenly? The riddle echoed in my head, the answer now seeming painfully obvious, flashing like a neon sign. Love. My brother's head snapped in my direction. The answer is love, I told them. You never prepared for it. It creeps up on you, and you can outrun it. I should know that better than anyone. Emmett grinned. Love is blind. People kill for love, Victoria and you being the perfect examples. You can fall out of love, and so it dies young. Or it lives into old age, Jasper smiled victoriously, as we know best. The Sphinx chuckled lowly. Very good, she said. Very good, indeed. I guess this means you get to live. Would you have been able to kill us anyway? Emmett smiled. You'll never know now, will you? Her tail gently caressed the air, but after a moment or two, it gave an irritated flick, the movement jarring with the otherwise fluid motion. A sigh of annoyance abruptly escaped the Sphinx's mouth. All these years, a millennium of peace, and the first time I get woken up, it's by a bunch of nosy, meddling vampires. I knew admitting your family into Hogwarts was a bad idea. Bah, how do you even know about that? Jasper inquired, inching forwards. The Sphinx smirked, oozing arrogance. I know everything. I am 6,000 years old. Great. Now I feel even smaller. What's the relevance of your age? I asked, feeling petulant, if you've been down here sleeping for 1,000 years. Only my body has been hidden here, she explained calmly. Like a snake, her long tail moved forwards through the air, and swept back her inky mane, preventing it from draping across her face. Astral projection is a gift belonging to all sphinxes. We can command our spirits to leave our bodies at will, and whilst we wander the earth, invisible to the eyes of the world, our physical shell turns to stone. Unless we choose to stay within our bodies, we remain immortal. This is also the reason for our omniscience. We know the secrets of history, and because we can communicate telepathically with other, wiser spirits, some of whom can wander back and forth through time, most of us have seen the future too. I must have looked like a total dimwit as I stood there, staring up at the ancient Egyptian, trying to absorb her revelation. It was an altogether mind-boggling notion, almost impossible to accept. Of course, I then remembered that I was standing in a room worth more than every palace on British soil, buried hundreds of feet beneath a school that happened to employ centaurs, vampires, and half-giants to teach its students. Astral projection, it turned out, wasn't all that far-fetched. So where were you just now? The Sphinx frowned at my rudeness. That isn't really any of your concern, but, if you must know, I was attending a UN convention in New York. I take an interest in world affairs. Anything good? Emmett chuckled, completely at ease, his head cocked slightly to the side. Same old leaders discussing global warming without the intention of doing anything, everyone threatening Iran ignoring everyone, the Americans pointing the finger at the British over BP, the British shouting that the company is controlled largely by American shareholders, etc., etc. How did you know to come here though? I emphasized, indicating the golden hull with a wave of my hand. The Sphinx huffed. What is this 20 questions? I am the one who should be demanding answers. There I was, minding my own business. Well, not really, she conceded, when my brow arched with incredulousness. All right, there I was, enjoying the World Politics Evening Special. She makes it sound like a bad TV drama, Emmett mused, trying not to laugh. And, all of a sudden, I have to jump thousands of miles because my shell is putting out an alarm like you wouldn't believe. I wasn't sure how to respond to that. I'd never imagined meeting a giant talking sphinx before, but if I had, she certainly wouldn't have possessed the character of a middle-aged gossip, nor would she have slipped at random from formal speech into something dotted with colloquialisms. Technically, we're the ones that should be asking the questions, Emmett sniggered, since, according to you, you already know everything. The golden eyes of the Sphinx narrowed to slits, whilst her tail gave a fierce jolt above her head, flicking forwards like the sting of a scorpion. I do know everything, she hissed, regal and authoritative once more. More than you could possibly imagine. My daring brother, regardless of intrigue, knew better than to provoke the creature when her voice promised so much danger. He wasn't afraid of her, because he was still convinced that our species was the most powerful and deadly on the planet. Despite that, he knew, as did Jasper and I, that the Sphinx deserved respect. None of us wished to offend her, especially since doing so would likely produce zero answers, and so, rather than requesting that she demonstrate her knowledge, the three of us waited, standing side by side in patient silence, and allowed her to make the next move. This, it appeared, pleased her, for her face softened considerably. My name is Akaret, she said, after an initial pause. Before I came here, my home was Egypt. I guarded a temple of Osiris in the Upper Kingdom, and was revered by the people, who gave offerings and libations to thank me for my services. I had walked the earth for 4,000 years, and not once in that time did I ever meet a threat, but the world was changing in frightening ways. Religious disquiet, I guessed, doing the math. Akaret smiled, but it was similar to that an adult might show a child, patient, and a little indulgent. Turmoil was threatening the Muggle world, she continued with glazed eyes. Back then, paganism was everywhere. It wasn't uncommon to practice sorcery, and even those who hadn't been born with magical abilities did so. Their spells were ineffective, of course, but no one was persecuted for performing incantations. Because the dividing lines between the magical and non-magical community was less defined, however, there was a massive danger that the two would merge, and give birth to a new social hierarchy, where witches and wizards would rule over Muggle slaves. The Sphinx's face grew sourer the deeper into the story she delved, her golden lips pinching at the resentful memory. I hung on her every word, immersed in this new version of history. Something had to be done, she hissed, shaking her head. Those with the power were abusing it, failing to adhere to their responsibilities. It was a large enough crisis that a council of spirits was called to tackle the problem. It was then that we resolved to push the Muggle people in a new direction to encourage a faith already beginning to take shape, one that would set the boundaries once and for all. We spent years, all of us, the Sphinxes, the genii, the totems, and so on, whispering to the souls of the Muggles we protected, repaying them for their devotion. We set them free. The tone of Akaret's voice conjured the image of a mother bidding her child goodbye. It inspired an overwhelming sense of loss, which seemed to resonate deep inside me, at my very core. I suddenly understood how easy it would prove for the Sphinx and her spirit friends to influence mortal and immortal souls. Even I, a vampire, was not immune to her magic. What happened then? Jasper urged gently, looking deflated. Akaret exhaled a deep and heavy sigh. They turned on us. The Muggles were all too eager to break away, and when they did, once Christianity, Islam and the rest had gathered enough momentum, they set about eradicating the evidence of paganism. They desecrated temples, destroyed monuments that had stood for thousands of years. You get the idea. That's how I ended up here, she admitted, her golden eyes narrowing with fury. What do you mean? I pressed. About 1,000 years ago, a group of self-righteous Christians were storming their way through Europe. They'd already caused more than enough damage by the time they reached Egypt. Because of our commitment, we great Sphinxes couldn't simply get up and walk away when our bodies were threatened. There are many sizes amongst my kind, in the same way that there are a number of different sized cats. The smaller, less conspicuous Sphinxes could easily slink away in the middle of the night. Anyone who saw them simply confused them with lions. But no one could mistake you for a lion, Emmett finished. Precisely, Akaret nodded. Being seen would have meant jeopardizing the new order. Because of our oath, most were destroyed, and their spirits trapped for eternity on the astral plane. I, on the other hand, was lucky. I took another step forwards, sensing the end to the tale. Akaret grinned at my enthusiasm. My white knight appeared in the form of Rowena Ravenclaw. She was one amongst the many crusading witches and wizards trying to protect the old spirits. She offered to bring me to Hogwarts, and conceal me beneath the school. In return, I bestowed magical powers upon her diadem, so that the wearer would enjoy supreme intellect. My body has rested here ever since. Here, Akaret ended her history, and lowered her head to the ground, where it rested lazily in front of her on her crossed paws. Her heart pumped out a loud beat, deep and strong against my ears. It immediately conjured images of a large bass drum, one constantly working to a largo tempo. Like a set of cogs turning too quickly, Emmett's mind was working furiously. He had 100 questions swirling through his mind, all at the same time, but he couldn't decide which one he wanted to ask first. When he finally did speak, the urge to slap myself was almost too difficult to ignore. Who really killed Kennedy? Akaret threw back her head, unleashing a gush of bellowing laughter. Jasper and I, on the other hand, ducked our heads in embarrassment. All the questions in the history of the world, I whispered, and you ask who shot JFK. Quite rightly, Emmett raked a hand through his curly hair, clearly uncomfortable after his silly question. That in itself was a rare sight, unless, of course, Rosalie had something to do with it. My sister had a talent for making others uneasy. Her husband was a sucker for punishment. How about a deal? Akaret said a moment later, once she'd gotten over my brother's gaffe. I was immediately wary. I don't particularly want anyone else around here finding out about my crib. And here we were again, persona switching from mighty temple guardian to modern TV addict. MTV, I interrupted, my brow peaking. She smirked at my humor. I roll with the times, dog. Ah, touché, indeed. As I was saying, I propose a deal. We re-listening, Jasper encouraged. His piercing, gray eyes snapped to meet mine, before shifting back again. Agree to nothing, Edward. We must be cautious. I nodded. He saw the motion through his periphery. The Sphinx rose, stretching out of her casual sprawl, until she sat regally once again, with a posture that reinforced an all-business attitude. I will offer each of you the chance to ask one question, which I will answer truthfully, providing that you swear, under magical oath, never to speak a word regarding anything you have seen or heard tonight to anyone else. Disappointment instantly welled deep in my chest. It must have shown in the set of my face, because the Sphinx gave me a knowing look, her full lips turning down in disapproval. I glanced at my brothers. They, too, looked a little dejected. We'd all been eager to share our discovery with the others. I especially regretted that Carlyle wouldn't get to hear the story. He would have been enthralled. The offer was too irresistible to decline though, as Akaret knew only too well. Her tail moved fluidly through the air, evidencing her confidence. We didn't disappoint. The second ID nodded my assent. Radiant white light flooded the room, flaring from the eyes of the great, ancient Sphinx. It shone with such brilliancy that all evidence of the previous liquid gold was removed. The light was like that of a Patronus. When it washed against my supposedly impenetrable skin, the only adequate phrase I could find to describe the sensation was a warm, soothing invasion. Instead of reflecting off my white, vampiric body as it should have, it penetrated everything corporeal. I could feel the magic binding itself to me as I made the oath with Jasper and Emmett. By the time we were finished, I knew that the spell had been successful. I would never utter a word to anyone about my meeting with Akaret for as long as I lived. Right, who's first? She said enthusiastically, eager to demonstrate her vast knowledge. Jasper was quick to step forwards. He'd already decided on his question, and it was one that I, too, desperately wished to have answered. If there is one, what is the cure for vampirism? I couldn't read the Sphinx's expression as she stared down at the empath, who beseeched her with palms faced upwards, as if in prayer. Finally, after drawing a deep breath, she said, "There is a cure." Emmett inhaled sharply. Rather, there used to be. Something shattered inside me. It seemed the equivalent of hearing a million balloons explode in the very same second. The bulging, delicious hope preceded nothing but a dark, oppressive vacuum and emptiness. Akaret gave a sad smile of apology. The first vampire was made from 1,000 natural poisons, she said. On the meager upside, at least she confirmed first the story of Lilith. The cure was quite simple, yet complex, as strange as that sounds. What was it? Emmett pushed. Why the past tense? I don't understand. For every poison, there was an antidote. Basilisk venom, for example, requires phoenix tears. To return a vampire to human form, the 1,000 anti-venoms would have to be administered together, injected all at once, straight into the heart. The second transformation would be slower than the first, for the heart would need time to fully absorb the serum before reanimating. The 3-day process would begin following a 12-hour prelude. The pain would be just as excruciating, a demonic cold, capable of quenching the thirst forever and restoring mortality. My breath came in quick and shallow bursts. The cure sounded logical. Besides Bella, I had never wanted anything so badly in all my life. The only problem, the Sphinx explained, is that some of the plants and creatures that provided the essential ingredients became extinct long ago. She shook her head and sighed, her lustrous eyes swelling with pity. I am sorry, but your chance of a cure died out with them. Right then, I would have hated to be Jasper. My own grief felt as if it would crush me, even though I hadn't really lost anything. What must it have been like for the empath, who was burdened with that same load 3 times over? I selfishly tried not to intrude on his thoughts. When he sagged under the weight of our regret, I reached out and gave his shoulder a gentle squeeze. Hey, we have forever with the girls. He nodded without returning my gaze, but I could tell that he took immense comfort from the knowledge that Alice would never leave him. Emmett stepped forward. Sadness was etched along his frame in the way he carried himself, shoulders slumped forwards, arms hanging limply at his sides. Does that mean then that there's no magic in existence that could give my wife a vampire a child of her own? Akaret perked up suddenly. Ah, now that's more like it. It is absolutely possible for vampire women to conceive, as long as the correct methodology is applied. What? Emmett leapt forwards, his stance a copy of Jasper's, palms turned up in supplication. What methodology? His tone screamed desperation, for which I couldn't blame him. Ah, but you've already asked your question, Emmett. Yes, and you didn't give me a full answer, he growled through glistening teeth. I think you'll find I did, hissed the Sphinx. Panic invaded my brother's thoughts. He'd been cheated. I wanted to jump forwards and argue his case. He had asked a straight question. The Sphinx, maddeningly, had given him a direct answer, revealing as little as she could get away with in the process. When Emmett realized he'd blown his one chance to find a solution to Rosalie's problem, he immediately turned to me. Please, Edward, I am begging you, please, Ask her how to do it. Bella might want a baby too one day. Please. I couldn't look him in the eye. I couldn't bear to see the sheer desperation that I knew would be etched across every inch of his face. On the one hand, he had a point. Bella might want a baby one day, in the same way that my mother and sister craved children of their own. On the other hand, if there really was a massive threat drawing ever closer to the girl I loved, I had to know how to protect her. What use would it be to dream of children if Bella wasn't going to be around long enough to have them? Edward, please. He grabbed my arm in silent plea. Please, Emmett. At the sound of his name, my brother turned to face the Sphinx. Her golden eyes swung with pity as she looked down upon him. Edward has his own question to ask. Besides, you don't need his help to find the answer. You'll discover it sooner than you think after Venus makes her path across the sun. Arg, enough with the cryptic comments already, I thought, seriously contemplating the idea of smashing my head against one of the supporting pillars. It was strange to see the weariness that suddenly overcame my brother. Emmett was effervescent by nature, filled with a cheer that grew like a mountain stream, gathering force until it became a mighty, tumbling river, gushing with energy. Tonight, his exuberance had run dry. You can know that, he whispered. He stood with eyes cast down, a true indication of his current dejectedness. Of course I can, the Sphinx purred, pity transforming into a wide smile of encouragement. Your family is generating quite a bit of talk on the astral plane. A few months ago, it was all about Harry Potter. Now, it's the Cullens. A hot topic. Why? I asked quickly. Akaret stifled a giggle. Is that your question? My eyes shot wide with panic. No, it isn't. This time, she did laugh, the sound thick like caramel. Her good mood must have made her generous, for when she turned back to my brother, she gazed at him speculatively, and said, you know what? I am a total sucker for dimples. I guess it wouldn't hurt to give you a little clue. I'd rather you give me the answer straight up, Emmett thought, but if this is all I am going to get after a few moments of anxiously chewing his lower lip, a bad habit he'd inherited after too much time spent in the company of humans, he nodded, staring up at the Sphinx from beneath his lashes. Akaret crouched lower to the ground, leaning in like an excited teenager about to whisper something scandalous into a friend's ear. You were trapped in the same second, she said slowly, never moving forwards. Time, therefore, is your problem. It is also the remedy. The thing you are seeking lives inside a bell jar, hidden deep within the belly of London. London, Akaret nodded. I exchanged a nonplussed glance with Jasper. Emmett, meanwhile, looked reasonably appeased. At least now we had a starting point. Suddenly, the memory of a dream crashed through my mind. A tiny boy with vampire skin and violet eyes, waving down from a high peak to a golden-haired woman, my sister, who sat ensnared by chains and time on the opposite side of the valley, unable to cross the river to reach him. One day, far in the future, would those chains break? I'd never quite figured out how anyone could possess enough imagination to design a face so lovely and perfect. The possibilities hit me now like a ton of bricks, and I sucked in a quick breath, almost choking from shock. If Bella's dream was more than just a dream, as they usually were, then the little girl with the bronze curly hair and eyes like chocolate buttons. Exclamation mark. The idea was like an unconquerable virus. It infected every corner of my mind, instilling a feverish desire that spread lower to my heart, where it quickly began consuming the long-dead organ. I wanted that little girl. I wanted to know her, to listen to her pealing laughter 1,000 times over with my own 2 ears, and commit it to memory. I wanted to spoil her rotten, to have waffles and ice cream ready for her when she came bounding out of her room each morning, still clothed in her PJs, and to tell her stories about fairies, princesses, and courageous white knights each time I tucked her back in. It was far too tempting a notion to be believable, though. It had to be a coincidence, an enormous, cruel coincidence. I just wasn't that lucky. The dream was exactly that, I realized with a stab of desolation. A dream. When I finally managed to shake myself from my pointless imaginings, I realized that, unsurprisingly, the Sphinx's gaze had fallen on me. There was an overt dare in the arch of her brow. She was still awaiting my question, but I was massively fearful of what I might hear once I opened my mouth. Finally, with a heavy sigh, I bit the bullet. Bella Swan. Ah, yes, Bella Swan, Akaret repeated mysteriously. A fascinating creature. Indeed. Quite recently, a seer from Mahuyama made an interesting prediction. Chiyoko, the Sphinx nodded. Quite, I said through my teeth. Even the name had my blood boiling. She said that Bella had a destiny of great import, one that she must fulfill before either of us can find peace. I was just wondering what did she mean by that exactly. Due to the seriousness of my question, I refused to buckle under the intense gaze of the Titanic Egyptian, even when it seemed to burn along my skin like fire. This one will require a bit of context to answer. It's going to be rather like ripping of a band-aid, I think, she frowned. Just give it to me straight. As you wish. On either side of me, my brothers tensed. My body too, went into lockdown, preparing itself for the worst. Quite simply, Isabella Swan shall be the most powerful and lethal vampire in the history of the universe. I beg your pardon, I want to repeat myself, Akaret declared, in a bored kind of droll. Her sudden lack of sympathy had my hands bunching tightly against my sides. Was she bipolar, or something? Is this some kind of a joke? Emmett snorted, crossing his arms. I mean, sure, we all know that Bella as a vampire will equate to something awesome, but, really, I think most powerful vampire in the history of the universe is a bit of an exaggeration. I was inclined to agree with my brother. The alternative was far too difficult to accept, that my soft, charming fiancé was fated to become a bloodthirsty vessel for that much power. Perhaps I'd been expecting the Sphinx to retract the prediction, to have her break down in hysterics and confirm it had all been her strange version of a bad joke. When that failed to transpire, naturally, I wavered. Emmett shook his head over and over in disbelief. No, just no, it can't be. This is Bella we talking about. You've got it wrong. I have not got it wrong. Akaret roared suddenly. The chamber trembled and shook, as if caught in the grip of an earthquake, cowering at the fire in her voice. Her eyes blazed like flaming topaz jewels, and her large white canines flashed as her lips curled back. Evidently, sphinxes were a proud, egotistical race. To wound their pride was perilous. Every spirit would tell you precisely the same thing, if only you possessed the capacity to hear them. The extent of Bella's magical arsenal will be unprecedented, very nearly limitless, she growled. With her powers strengthened 1,000 times over, vampire skin will prove a useless defense. How do you mean? Jasper fired. Vampire magic works largely in the mind. Whilst Bella will still be able to use her wand in the normal way, as one of you, her powers will evolve as you would expect. Imagine her in a fight against Jane of the Volturi. An involuntary shudder shot down my spine. I already knew Jane's power couldn't penetrate Bella's occlumency, but that didn't mean I wanted to think about a match between the two. Far from it. Whilst Jane's ability would prove useless against Bella, Akaret explained, echoing my thoughts, the reverse would be quite the opposite. The Cruciatus curse against vampire skin is completely ineffective if projected into the mind, however. Then Jane would finally get a taste of her own medicine, Emmett finished, a wicked smirk playing at his mouth. That notion alone was lovely. The seed grew into a wonderland in less than a second. After witnessing her try furiously, on 2 separate occasions, to torture the love of my existence, the idea of Jane's power being reflected back at her was the equivalent of lying on a bed of cotton candy clouds, beneath a sky constructed entirely of rainbows, in the center of which shone a smiley-faced sun, who had donned a pair of designer shades to protect himself against his own brilliance. Precisely, the Sphinx grinned. In addition, she will carry her animagus abilities into her immortal life. She will be faster and stronger than anything you have ever witnessed before. I didn't see Emmett huff, because my eyes were already riveted to Akaret, but I heard the sigh of frustration. How fast are we talking here? He grunted. Fast. The speed ratio between undead lion to undead humanoid will be similar to the mortal one. Think new land speed record. What? My brothers and I shouted in unison. But the current record is 763 miles per hour. Emmett protested. The Sphinx chuckled. Like I said, fast. Emmett shook his head furiously. The average maximum speed for a vampire is around 150. That's a 1:5 ratio. A human S to a lion S is only 1:3. I thought you said they'd be similar. Akaret released a sumptuous giggle, her tail swishing from side to side. All right, maybe not. How fast? I asked flatly, afraid of the answer. If I didn't develop an inferiority complex by the end of the night, it would be a miracle. 750, Emmett guessed uncertainly. 800, Jasper followed. Akaret's eyes shifted back to me, her full lips turning up in amusement. As Bella's mate, I felt obligated to bet higher than my brothers, both of whom were regarding me with knowing expression. I couldn't see myself winning. 850 was just too fast for any creature. When I gave my reply, the Sphinx chuckled. You should have more faith, Edward. The actual figure is a little over 900, I believe. My mouth fell open with an audible pop, whilst my eyes bulged from their sockets. No way, thought Emmett. No freakin' way, I will not believe it. I refuse. There's more, Akaret revealed, but I don't want to completely ruin the surprise. Now, to answer your question, there are those who will seek to destroy Bella out of fear, not to mention jealousy. The words were like a match tossed into a tanker of gasoline. Beneath the wintry exterior, a legion of savage flames were licking at my insides, like 1,000 hellish tongues, igniting a rage destined to become an inferno. Who? I hissed. The Sphinx laughed without humor. Can you think of no one? Yes, but if we rethinking of the same vampires, that would immediately spell death for Bella, which I absolutely refused to accept. I ignored my brothers as their heads snapped in my direction. Akaret returned my stare with an expression of the utmost seriousness. You wished to know of the danger shrouding your mate's future, and here it is. Bella Swan was created to take down the Volturi. Not possible, Jasper argued. My arms fell limply at my sides. The Sphinx's words didn't make sense. Isn't it? She challenged, irritated at our doubt. All her life, she has been conditioned for the battle I speak of, plunged into adversity time and time again, to prepare her mentally for what she has to do. It's the only way for her. The Volturi will not allow her to live once they discover the extent of her power. It is forbidden to make vampires of witches and wizards. Arrow made one himself once, but he soon dubbed his creation an abomination, after he realized the man possessed the power to usurp him. Unfortunately for the new vampire, he wasn't in a Cullens like Bella. They made quick work of him after Alex stripped his senses. The three leaders negotiated with the Wizarding Ones, requesting that all magical areas be heavily protected against vampires. The ministers assured Arrow, Keys, and Marcus that disguises were already in place, ones that only magical eyes could see through. How is it then that we've been able to access Uluru? Jasper asked. The spells on Uluru specifically drown out sound, since no one would expect a shopping center to be concealed beneath a giant rock. And Diagon Alley, you entered the leaky cauldron through the flow, I believe, rather than through the front door. Yes. Well, then, there's your answer, Akaret replied, as if it should be obvious. I slapped my forehead suddenly, frustrated by the unimportant discussion Jasper and the Sphinx were currently taking part in. Forget the spells. What about Bella? I stomped forwards, motivated by sheer desperation, until I was so close that I had to crane my neck. How do I stop this? The Egyptian's face went slack. It gave nothing away, as she said, you can The universe is bored with Arrow, Keys, and Marcus, Edward. It has sought their replacement. Replacement? She's just a girl, for crying out loud. And Harry Potter is just a boy, yet he became the master of death and the vanquisher of Lord Voldemort all in the space of a day. You can stop this, she stressed, staring directly into my eyes. The tone of her voice was almost imploring, as if my acceptance of this fact was somehow paramount. You mustn't try. I promise it will be to Bella's detriment if you do. I hissed at her suggestion. If you talking about that planetary tug-of-war bull, Akaret grunted in disgust. Please. Chiyoko's prediction might have been accurate, but she wasn't right about everything. Like, Emmett pressed. Her interpretation of Venus' connection with Mars was romantic. It isn't about love triumphing over war at all. It's about appeasing one to the point where he surrenders his hold. In layman's terms, if Bella Swan wants to live a life dominated by love, she has to get Mars off her back, and the only way to do that is to hand him the heads of the vampire kings. If she doesn't destroy them, eventually perhaps not straight away they'll destroy her. It is that simple. Despair's tendrils were coiling around my body, applying unbearable pressure, especially around my heart, which, despite its stillness, was protesting adamantly, screaming out that this couldn't be allowed to happen. I shook my head over and over. My chest heaved as I sucked in a series of quick, deep inhalations, desperately trying to combat the mounting negative emotions. If I don't turn her, they won't have a reason to kill her, I said, my mind working quickly. You re-forgetting what they promised in Volterra, Jasper reminded me, his head falling forwards into his palms. Emmett groaned beside him. My heart sank. He was right. Either way, the Volturi would come for us for Bella. They would not let her live as a mortal, they would not let her live as an immortal either. My breath continued to come quickly, though it grew shallower as my anxiety peaked. I needed an outlet for the shattering anguish building inside me. If I didn't figure out how to subdue it, it would soon blow me into 1,000 pieces. The Sphinx crouched low once more, pressing her chin to the ground in the process, so that her gaze was as close to level with mine as she could manage. For the final time, Patronus-like light issued from her irises, disguising their natural honey tone. It was even brighter this time around, and blinded my eyes to everything around me, including the giant Sphinx herself, thus replacing one mind-whirling sight with another. 1 second, I was standing in the golden-pillared hall, the next, a snow scene was exploding across my vision. I recognized the clearing where the wolves and my family had fought the newborns. My ears rang with the sound of battle, but no war cry was louder or more enraged than that of the girl upon whom the Volturi were converging. Her frenzied eyes were as red as rubies, the pupils contracting with hate as she charged alone, towards the oncoming force. I spun on the spot, searching desperately for her supporting allies, and was met by an image that I could never have prepared myself for in a million years. My family, surrounded by dozens of familiar faces, the wolves, my Denali cousins, the Irish coven, and others too. Then there was one I had seen before, but not through my own eyes until now. It was a face that did not yet exist, but was so indescribably beautiful that it could never be constructed through simple imagination. The bronze-haired little girl, who sat cradled in my arms. Her face was stained with 2 glistening trails of tears as she clutched herself close to me, to my future self, her tiny fingers closing around my shirt. Together, we looked out onto the same scene with expressions of matching terror, through towering bars of fire. Daddy, the little girl sobbed. I could barely describe the emotions that one word gave birth to. The sadness in her voice sparked a deep, resonating ache, and I was sure, in that moment, that I fully understood the sufferings of empaths. The word itself filled me with an contrasting, infinite joy. My heart felt as if it had been inflated, and would push me up into the air, like a hot air balloon, where I would remain eternally, weightless. Look, Renesmee, said my future self. Renesmee. I rather turned her face away from the unfolding battle, so that it was buried against my neck, protecting her innocent chocolate eyes, an exact copy of her mother's. I was so disarmed by the sight of future Edward and in his my daughter I swallowed hard, unable to breathe, so absorbed in that entirely life-altering moment, for I was not the same Edward now that I had been 10 seconds before, that I momentarily forgot the horrifying scene playing out behind me. A high scream of agony, which transformed a tenth of a second later into a horrible ripping sound, had me spinning once more. Bella was nowhere to be seen, and, yet, the Volturi were still continuing their vampire sprint, their faces a mixture of rage, panic, and utter confusion. Suddenly, a vampire at the front, one of the lower-ranking guard members, quite literally split in two, as if some invisible sword had sliced right through his abdomen. As his legs fell limply to the ground, his muscled upper body went flying through the air, landing a split second later by the head of another Volturi casualty. Opposite me, at the very edge of the field, were Jane, Alec, and the 3 leaders, all of whom, excluding Marcus, were looking on to the fray, wearing masks of hate and fury, muddled with disbelief. The once solemn vampire appeared anything but in that moment. Marcus' face was animated in a way that I had never seen before. It was murderous, and his frenzied eyes were fixed upon the monster he called brother. Arrow. Another high shriek pulled my focus away, back to the center of the field, where Bella had suddenly materialized. The troops thundered towards their target, teeth bared and bloodthirsty. When the nearest was little more than 6 feet away, Bella pulled up her arm, her snowy fist tightly clenched, and, with the almighty roar of the lioness, she slammed it down into the snow-covered earth. The vision cut off a second later, before I had the chance to witness the effect of the sledgehammer punch. The noise, however, bellowed in my ears long after the golden chamber had reappeared around me. It was the very definition of power. The epitome of magic. The sound of thunder. I blinked back to reality. The only testimony to the premonition's truth, the only evidence proving it wasn't a concoction of my overactive imagination, was that my brothers began replaying it in their own heads. They'd seen it too. They'd seen the warrior witch in her charge towards the enemy. They'd seen the Volturi fighters fall, one by one, effortlessly mown like feeble blades of grass. They'd seen the child, my daughter, my Renesmee. The Sphinx, meanwhile, having fulfilled her side of the bargain, had resumed her majestic pose, and stared on into space, eyes unseeing, her body as hard as stone. BPOV. I was not in a good mood. Last night, I had been restless in bed. After waking up at 2 in the morning, a most unholy hour, I found that I could not get back to sleep. Every time I was on the verge, I was suddenly thrust back by the thread of a dark dream into an alert state of consciousness, and so at 8 o'clock on Tuesday morning, in the midst of my peers, I spent breakfast with my head in my hands at the Gryffindor table, focusing all my efforts on staying awake. "Rough night, Bella," Seamus sniggered, before attacking his bacon sandwich. I grunted my reply without bothering to lift my head. He laughed again, this time joined by several others. For some reason though, one I didn't fathom right away, the jovial sound was wrong in my ears, incomplete. I looked up in confusion, and searched for the source of my unease. My eyes immediately landed on Emmett, whose bellowing laughter so frequently drowned out any accompanying chortles. Today, he looked far from amused, and sat with his elbows resting on the table, a golden goblet pressed to his mouth, the rim of which he continued to absently skim against his pale lips. He must have been deep in thought, for he rarely passed up on an opportunity to make fun of me. This was highly irregular. His frosty blue eyes were overflowing with a baffling combination of disbelief and some other emotion I couldn't identify. What I could not understand was why they were riveted solely on me. It was completely unnerving, so much so that I uncertainly turned to his brothers. I was beyond suspicious when I realized that both Edward and Jasper were staring at me in precisely the same manner. "Do I have something on my face?" Edward's eyes, green like lagoon waters a result of his breakfast, gave a few rapid blinks. "What? My face?" I repeated. "Do I have something on it?" "No," he replied, eyes narrowing with confusion. "Why are you looking at me like that then?" "Like what?" "Like you've never seen me before in your life." I folded my arms in exasperation, and pursed my lips. After adjusting his position on the bench, so that his body was angled towards me, Edward reached for my hand, pulling it into his lap, where he began to trace patterns along my palm. "I just can't get over how incredible you are," he murmured. I arched an eyebrow, a result of swelling doubt. It wasn't exactly out of the ordinary for my old-fashioned fiancé to shower me with compliments, but there was something different about the way he did so that morning, something different in the way of his eyes, in the way they seemed to worship me. The reverent sparkle was still there, the one that flickered whenever he looked at me, but today it was brighter, entirely more radiant and confusing, and I had absolutely no idea why. "It's true," he murmured, voice softer than ever. "You're amazing, and I love you." I blushed at his words, conscious of the people surrounding us. They were evidently conscious of us too, for just as Edward was about to lean in and place a chaste, gentle kiss on my cheek, he was swiftly interrupted by a theatrical gagging noise. My eyes flicked over his shoulder to where Amicus and Viola were chuckling unashamedly. Edward crossed his arms and turned to face the pair, but the smirk he wore revealed the fact that his amusement outweighed the undercurrent of irritation. The young Gryffindor beater pointed to his plate, which was loaded with a very generous portion of scrambled eggs, sausages, hash browns, bacon rashers, beans and toast. It was no wonder that he'd gained 3 inches since Christmas. "Could we turn the mushy stuff down a notch? A fella's got to eat." Rosalie reached across the table to muss his hair. He scrunched his nose, playfully pretending to dislike her girly attentions. Edward, meanwhile, resumed his staring, and rather than question the scrutiny again, I collapsed back onto the table, hiding my face from him and his watchful brothers. As the week drew on, I became increasingly suspicious of the vampire men. They slunk away at any opportunity, and more than once I happened across them on my journey throughout the castle. Each time, they were huddled together in some quiet corner, speaking in rushed whispers. It was starting to wear on my nerves. Whenever I questioned them about it, I always received the same nothing going on. Bella, are you reimagining things? Alice and Rosalie, too, noticed the odd behavior, and even they couldn't piece it together. Alice tried, but she complained that something was interfering with her visions. That was hardly surprising, considering we were at Hogwarts. Before long, I simply gave up. With the professors cranking up the workload, I didn't have time to indulge my suspicions. Professor Slughorn's class proved to be the most demanding. The next 4 months were allotted to coursework completion. Each NEWT student had been given the name of a different potion that he or she would be required to produce. Before the brewing could commence, however, we all had to carry out lengthy research to uncover the essential ingredients and recipes. On top of that, each student had to submit a 35-inch essay outlining their intended method and how they would procure each ingredient. Every herb had to be grown from scratch, thus linking our potions assignment with our herbology coursework. Everything had to be planned out meticulously. If one thing wasn't done accurately and at the correct time, the results could prove disastrous. It didn't help that each potion was of the most advanced kind of magic. When Slughorn sent the hat around the classroom, Edward the lucky thing picked out Felix Felicis. I suspected he'd been watching the visions flash like a strobe light through his sister's head, constantly changing his mind until he finally found the folded piece of paper he wanted more than any other. I, on the other hand, picked out a Mortentia. On the upside, I said to the lovely vampire currently leaning in over my shoulder, "You'll be able to tell me if I am getting it right." "Why's that?" "Well, a Mortentia smells differently to each person, doesn't it? If the scent doesn't match mine exactly when you smell it, either A, I didn't do it right, or B, there's someone out there who'll smell tastier to you than I do." He chuckled lowly and shook his head. Definitely not possible. The mind-numbing workload acted as a distraction from more than just the boy's peculiar behavior. It also pulled my thoughts away from the Death Eaters, or, at least, it did up until we were 3 weeks into the new term. When Talto delivered the Daily Prophet on the 22nd of January, the headline made my stomach clench. It read, "Attack on Ministry's Doorstep." The blood drained from my face, leaving my skin cold and clammy. Edward stiffened beside me, alerted by the rapid change in my heartbeat and my sickly complexion. "Bella, the Death Eaters have staged another attack. They tried to place the Imperious Curse on Tiberius Ogden on his way home from work." The witches and wizards seated nearby fell silent immediately, while the rest of the room continued to bustle with cheerful activity. "Tiberius Ogden," Ginny urged. "I know that name. Dad mentions him every now and then. He's been a member of the Wizengamot for years. He resigned when Cornelius Fudge made Umbridge High Inquisitor, but took up his old post following the investigation." Edward nodded. "He's Cormac McLagan's uncle." Hermione made a noise of disgust and rolled her eyes. What a shame Cormac didn't inherit the same sense of honor. He didn't even come back for the battle. "Of course he didn't," Rosalie chirped, tossing her golden hair. "That boy wouldn't know a backbone if it hit him in the face. How he expects to make a decent Auror, I have no idea." "Forget Cormac," Alice intervened. "What about Tiberius Ogden? If he's a member of the Wizengamot, he obviously has some influence." "More than most members," Ginny said lowly, her countenance darkening with worry. "He's an elder, which means he commands the respect of his colleagues. He'll have far more sway than most of the younger members. It makes sense that the Death Eaters would try to use him." The others listened carefully, before turning their attention back to me. I nodded in understanding and lowered my eyes back to the newspaper, where a stricken-looking man with a tuft of wispy, white hair was pictured in plum-colored robes beside the Minister for Magic, Kingsley Shacklebolt. "At 6:45 last night," I read aloud, "the Death Eaters staged their latest attack. When Tiberius Ogden, an elder member of the Wizengamot, departed the Ministry of Magic, little did he know that a small troop of you-know-who's old supporters were waiting to ambush him right outside his place of work. Mr. Ogden's home is located within the city center, little more than a mile from the ministry itself. I regularly walk to and from work," he told the Daily Prophet. "Even old men need their exercise." It is believed that the Death Eaters singled out Mr. Ogden for his influential and respected role in the magical court of law. Under the Imperious Curse, he would have proved a valuable ally to the enemy, and may even have been able to help curse other important ministry officials, including the minister himself, whom he has access to on a daily basis. There were 3 of them hiding in the theater not far from the visitors' entrance, and they jumped me as I was passing, Mr. Ogden said last night. Luckily, I managed to fire a message via Patronus back to headquarters before they got the chance to snatch my wand. The Aurors arrived in a matter of seconds, which was when they decided to make themselves scarce. The wizard's age may also have contributed to the Death Eater's decision. The enemy is moving slowly, stated Brone O'Friel, a particularly temperamental Auror and close friend of the minister. The fact that they specifically selected a vulnerable old man as opposed to someone younger reinforces their lack of confidence. Without their master, the Death Eaters are clearly unsure of themselves, and have revealed their hesitance on a number of occasions. Even so, none of us should become complacent. The enemy is still dangerous. Although the enemy's plans were foiled by Mr. Ogden's quick thinking, the assault has left him shaken, and he will be taking a short break from his duties after being granted compassionate leave by Kingsley Shacklebolt. Other ministry workers, meanwhile, continue to look over their shoulders, terrified that they will be next. I let the paper slip onto the table and fell silent. The atmosphere swelled with a strange combination of anxiety and relief. I was highly grateful that the Death Eater's plans had failed, but it didn't allay my fears of what would come next. How far would they go? Would they never give up? The answer rang in my head like a siren. No, they wouldn't. If they didn't find a way to resume their tyrannical rule, they would face the only alternative: Azkaban. Saber, I heard Edward hiss. My head snapped in his direction a second later. Fury was burning in the green of his irises, setting them alight like the leaves of a forest. Across the table, Rosalie leaned in closer. He isn't involved, Edward. You said so yourself. I said that his scent didn't match the masquerade attacker. That doesn't mean he isn't involved. He shook his head with feverish determination. No, he has to be working with the Death Eaters. Who's to say they don't have other members on the inside? And garlic. What human smells of garlic? And lemongrass, Emmett added. Don't forget that. Bah, Alice exclaimed, her hands flying into the air, before slamming back down onto the table with a bang. If they had more people working for them, then it wouldn't be taking them as long as it is doing to make progress. Let's face it, Edward, if the Death Eaters had more than the 2 we already know about, they'd be moving a lot faster with their plans. They're obviously taking caution to a whole new level. Edward folded his arms stubbornly across his chest. I am telling you, Alice, Saber is involved. I don't know how, but he is. Well, I haven't seen anything, she countered. That's probably because he owns a house elf. Hermione's eyes narrowed with distaste. We don't know that, Jasper pointed out, siding with his mate. Edward frowned at the empath, annoyed by his betrayal. Suddenly, Alice let out a series of high-chiming giggles, and turned her head in the direction of the massive doors leading into the Great Hall. I followed her stare, and was met by a sight that thwacked all pessimism to the farthest recesses of my mind. Harry, I squealed, in time with Hermione and Ginny. Ron. The 3 of us launched from our place at the table, sprinting as fast as our human limbs would allow down the length of the room, past dozens of Hogwarts students. The boys grinned at us from the entrance, their smiles cheesier than cheddar. Their laughter had all heads turning as we crashed against their bodies, which were now as good as new, thanks to the careful attention of the St. Mungo's healers. After ensnaring them both in fierce hugs, I moved back to allow the girls room to welcome their boyfriends. Ginny threw her arms around Harry's neck, clearly intent on squeezing the life out of him. Hermione, on the other hand, pulled Ron's face down and pressed her lips to his in a fierce kiss. Her fingers grabbed at his hair, porcelain weaving through red. He responded with hungry enthusiasm, moaning against her, while his arms pressed her closer to his own body, until they both resembled 2 tessellating pieces of a jigsaw. An annoyed cough broke the spell. Professor Martin stood behind them. Although he didn't look entirely surprised, his stance hinted at discomfort. Arms folded tightly over a white shirt and navy jacket, his body angled away from the 2 couples. I respect the fact that you are all happy to be reunited, he said curtly, but, I am afraid, human lips, or any other body part for that matter. My eyes bulged momentarily, Do not count as breakfast. I suggest you return to your table." With that, he marched away, leaving a chorus of low, muffled sniggering in his wake. This time, neither Emmett nor Jasper could resist, and sat with their faces pressed into their palms, their bodies shaking as they attempted to conceal their amusement. The bulkier of the two took it a step further and peeped over his hands, sending a cheeky wink at Hermione after catching her eye. Despite my friend's blush, she refused to be distracted by the burly vampire, and returned her focus to Ron. "If I knew I was going to get this kind of treatment," he chuckled on our way back to the others, "I would have almost gotten myself killed a long time ago." The comment earned him a jab to the ribs, courtesy of his girlfriend. "Don't do that to me again," she commanded fiercely, her face crumpling with pain. "We really thought that." Ron pulled her to a stop, and angled her body so that he could look her directly in the eyes. "We all right. I know, but, no buts. We all right." She nodded quickly, before jumping back into his embrace. He kissed the top of her head, earning another cough of irritation from Martin, who could only be heard because so many people were staring quietly on at the spectacle, distracted from their own conversations. Beside him, Professor Fulplume rolled her eyes, and stabbed a piece of sliced watermelon with her fork. "Oh, sod off," Ron muttered under his breath, poking his tongue out at the defense teacher when he wasn't looking. I pursed my lips to contain the giggles threatening to break free, continuing to stare at Fulplume and Martin. The Transfiguration teacher was angled away from the defense professor, hunched awkwardly over her breakfast. Martin seemed completely unaware. Edward chuckled and shook his head. I turned at the sound, and sent him a questioning glance. Professor Martin is an oblivious man. He's not brilliant at social interaction. I'd guessed that much. So when Professor Fulplume asked him why he showed no interest in human-to-animal transformations, he replied humanoids are at the top of the evolutionary ladder. Why would anyone aspire to move down it? I chuckled at Edward's perfect imitation. He shook his head, staring on at Martin with a mixture of despair and amusement. The crazy thing is that he still has absolutely no idea why Professor Fulplume stormed away from him. She's been off with him ever since, but he's convinced himself that her mood is the result of something completely separate. "Men," Rosalie blurted. Her eyes fell on her husband, clearly expecting some kind of reaction. Her brow furrowed with irritation when she realized he was paying her no attention. Once again, his eyes were on me, as they had been for the past week, and just like that, my suspicion was rekindled. The scrutiny of the three male vampires was seriously starting to freak me out. I was doubly grateful, therefore, for the distraction provided by Harry's and Ron's arrival. Everyone was eager to greet the pair. Together, my Gryffindor friends and I brought them up to date on everything that had happened during their absence. "We're going to have to give Slytherin a good thrashing," Seamus insisted. "Playing dirty is the only way forward. When did we ever play fair when it came to Slytherin?" I interjected, staring incredulously at my Irish peer. He acknowledged my question with a nod. Point taken. Despite our initial cheer, the sunny atmosphere soon darkened. Thick, black clouds seemed to settle overhead as the welcoming soon proceeded on to more serious matters. "What else was new? How's Mrs. Weasley?" Edward asked, his eyes on Ron and Harry. "Recovering," Ron answered, the grin dropping from his face. Hermione scooted closer to him, and gave his hand a compassionate squeeze. He sent her a grateful smile in return, but it was tinted with apprehension. After we came around, she spent a whole week fussing over us, which gave her something to do. To be honest, I am more worried about Dad. He still blames himself. I think so. Mum says he spends pretty much all his time now away from the house. He can face her. That's not technically true, Harry disagreed. I mean he was there at the hospital. He came to see us. Ron scoffed. Yeah, he came to see us. He looked half mad though. What do you mean? I probed, feeling my chest tighten. Mrs. Weasley had enough to deal with, she didn't need to add Mr. Weasley's nervous breakdown to the list. I dunno. He was just different. He looked panicked, like an animal trapped inside a cage. His eyes were wild. He's just worried about you, said Hermione, but Ron shook his head in disagreement. No, it's more than that. I am sure it is. I think he's losing it. Once, he grabbed my arm for no reason. I thought he was going to stop the blood flow, he was squeezing it that hard. He kept saying he was sorry over and over, and that he'd tried to stop it, but he couldn't. No one could stop the rock collapse unless they'd known it was going to happen beforehand, said Ginny, looking depressed. It all happened too fast. Hermione nodded in agreement. I exchanged nervous glances with Edward, who looked just as unsettled as I felt. There was something very wrong with this picture. Something about the accident was gnawing away at me, but I couldn't locate the source. I could put my finger on the thing that was really bugging me. The feeling stayed with me throughout breakfast, and it wasn't until I was on my way to my first lesson of the day that I managed to put it out of my mind. Edward and I parted ways on the grand staircase. He continued the climb to Trelawney's comedy class, while I made my way to Charms with Ron, Harry, Hermione, Neville, Seamus and Dean. Much to our extreme annoyance, Harry's and Ron's latest near-death experience had given an unnecessary boost to their celebrity status. They were both already massive in the wizarding world, owing to their efforts against Voldemort. The last thing they needed was more attention, but that's precisely what they received. The corridors were congested with swarms of witches and wizards, all determined to say hello to the late arrivals. They all have classes to go to," I grumbled, pushing past Romilda Vane, who huffed in indignation as she was shoved to one side. I thought she would got the message from that, but when I checked back over my shoulder, she was only a foot behind Harry, her claws curling around a small patch of his cloak as she followed with the rest of the lovesick harpies. Hermione seemed to share my irritation, and wound her arms more tightly around Ron's waist. "Just think happy thoughts," she said through gritted teeth. "I've got one," Seamus shouted over the clamor. "Drinking butter beer from the cup after we win the match against Slytherin." The suggestion earned a loud cheer from the group and surrounding Gryffindors. The door to the Charms classroom suddenly came into view as we turned the next corner. That image, when combined with the one planted firmly in my mind by Seamus, had me sighing with relief. "What about the Cullens?" asked Harry. "They can drink butter beer." We battled our way forwards through the crowd, like machete-wielding explorers cutting their way through obstructing flora. The comparison inspired a tasty notion. Cackling lowly, I lowered my shield, calling out to Edward. I knew he'd seen the image I'd wished to share with him, because I felt him lingering at the edge of my mind when I closed it a second later. "No," he replied. I chuckled again, suspecting that if he were here to speak to me, he would actually be smirking at the idea of his eccentric fiancée threatening the masses with a machete. "Bad girl," I flirted shamelessly, warmth spreading through my body. "Yes. Do you disapprove?" "No." I laughed again, before dragging my attention back to my current environment. Ron's concentration was visible in the purse of his lips as he continued to ponder Harry's question. I could almost discern the flash of a light bulb above his head when an idea suddenly struck him. "Those cocktail kits they sell in Honeydukes. We could buy a few of those. Every player could add a drop of blood. We'll call it winner's blood. Or Scarlet Victory," offered Dean. Hermione looked skeptical. "It sounds messy. What if they don't like it?" "Oh, they'll like it," I assured her, before swatting a young Ravenclaw on the head with my rolled-up newspaper, after she tried to reach past me to grab at Harry's robes. "How do you know?" "I already bought one for Edward. I figured it was only fair, considering how much it hurts him to be around me, or, at least, how much it used to." "Oh, of course you his singer. Your blood must be the tastiest and nicest smelling thing in the world to him." A series of cries and a loud thud had me spinning on the spot. I looked down to find a pile of girls at my feet, one collapsed on top of the other. "Nice going, Romilda," shouted a blonde-haired witch with an athletic build. At the bottom of the heap lay the girl in question. She was gawking up at me, her dark eyes distant and sparkling. The others and I decided to use the opportunity to make our getaway. With the flock of fangirls sprawled out on the floor, we dashed the last few meters down the stone corridor, before anyone could ask the boys for autographs. Hermione slammed the large wooden door shut the moment she was through it, cutting off our view of the numerous snooping faces staring in at us from outside. "Now I know what it feels like to live in a zoo," Ron grumbled. His tone didn't match the satisfied set of his mouth though, and I got the distinct impression that he really did enjoy all the attention he was getting. Just as Seamus was about to reply, he was cut off by a loud burst of music issuing from the front of the classroom, where a band of instruments were playing to themselves. Professor Flitwick was guiding the music like an orchestral conductor, waving his wand in complicated patterns from his podium. After a few minutes, he drew the song to a close and turned to face the rest of the class. I hope you all enjoyed that, because you'll each have to perform something similar for your NEWT exam. Brilliant. Just brilliant. EPOV. My attention became ebbing. I could not assume past the outstanding photographs swirling through my mind. Whenever I tried, they had crashed thunderously back to the foreground, demanding my interest. Focusing on Trelawney's nonsense lectures turned into difficult sufficient at the quality of instances, however it had proved even greater difficult since the assembly with the Sphinx. I used to be sick with longing. Renesmee turned into the handiest aspect I could think about. She changed into the best aspect my brothers may want to think about, apart, of course, from the superb and powerful creature her mom changed into destined to become. Her mother. Each time I looked at Bella now, I could in no way help however imagine the form of mother she might be to our daughter, loving glaringly, dedicated as I might be, fiercely defensive simply as she become with all and sundry she considered circle of relatives. Protective sure, we'd be simply that. I might kill every person who even checked out my Renesmee the wrong manner, and boys don't even get me began on those. Within the middle of the divination class, my mind abruptly flitted again to an earlier conversation I might had with my brothers. "She's gonna be a looker, Edward," Emmett murmured, his eyes on the distant horizon. We had been sat outside at the top of the astronomy tower, our legs dangling over the edge of the parapet, upon which we were perched. Of root she could be. 1-2 of her genes will come from Bella. The one's eyes, Jasper purred. So lovely. Of direction they may be Bella's. She had your hair though, he stated, nudging me inside the ribs. And your face. Hair yes, but I suppose ordinary she seemed extra like Bella. Emmett shook his head and grinned at me. Nah, guy, she truly has your face. I smiled lower back at him. For a few cause, their reviews thrilled me. Possibly it had something to do with the truth that I might in no way believed before that there was even the slightest threat I would at some point be a father, and so it was past extraordinary understanding that, in some unspecified time in the future within the future, there'd be a small, stunning woman who would inherit my physical traits. A protracted happy sigh escaped my lips, and my eyes fluttered close. Pics flashed behind my eyelids, searing their imprint onto my retinas. I saw myself wandering through the woodland behind the residence in Forks. On foot on either facet of me were mind-blowing beauties. One had long, immediately hair the coloration of mahogany, even as the opposite possessed a mass of bronze ringlets that fell past her waist. Bella and a grown-up Renesmee laughed as I casually slung my arms over their shoulders, and I grinned like an fool, glorying in the euphoria that got here with being a husband and father. It wasn't too long earlier than Emmett ruined the moment. He slapped me hard at the shoulder and stated, "You realize what this means, bro? You gonna get your lead too, and Bella's going to live through it. You sly canine." The subsequent punch I aimed at his jaw dispatched him flying backwards, off the brink of the parapet wherein he rolled onto the stone ground. This ordinary become quick becoming a everyday prevalence in our each-day sports. Jasper chuckled on the sight, or even I had a tough time retaining a instantly face, despite my inflammation. Discovering that there might genuinely be existence after the honeymoon surely eased a number of my fears, and I discovered myself wishing, extra than ever, for time to speed up, so that I might ultimately get the danger to be with Bella within the manner that we both wanted. A few seconds later, Emmett was sitting back with the aid of my facet and we have been continuing the discussion regarding my destiny daughter. What approximately the boys? Emmett cackled. I wouldn't understand, however I wager it is hell being father to a lady with seems like Renesmee's, specially whilst you additionally manifest to be a thoughts reader. At my brother's relevant remark, I groaned into the velvety night, permitting my head to fall into my arms. It all at once felt as though it had been pumped complete of lead. Emmett and Jasper, then again, have been hooting hysterically, naturally enjoying my growing experience of dread. Metal undies, I exclaimed, earning another round of howls from my brothers. I'll drain absolutely everyone that attempts to get via them, you mark my words. You can assist me. There is sure to be loads. One guy can simplest devour a lot. I threw my arms into the air as a brand new concept struck me. In truth, strike that. A dependency. Hiya, what's up? Hi there, Emmett stated warningly. A few men cross for that kind of element, you realize. I recognize. I nevertheless have a tough time wiping my mind of the photo of Rose in one. You have mentally scarred me for eternity. Ah, Emmett, Jasper said disbelievingly, leaning forwards to get a good view of the smirking vampire, you did not. Don T fake you haven T2, man. Rose advised me about Ali's mystery dresser. I don't want to pay attention it. I shouted, plugging my ears. A nurse-s outfit, a genie-s. Good day, that become a very good one. I were given 3 desires. Please, I begged. I might most effective just forgotten about that. The depravity by no means ceases. No, it would not, Emmett grinned, pinching my cheek. I quickly swatted his hand away. And you've got we're given it all to stay up for. Are not we getting a bit beforehand of ourselves? I said desperately, trying to find a manner to interchange the trajectory of our gift conversation. Shouldn't we be thinking about how we going to make Renesmee possible? The impact of my words changed into instant, sobering my brothers within the blink of an eye fixed. The grins dropped from their faces as they turned their vision again on the foreboding forest stretching into the gap. I seemed from one to the other and back again, listening to the mind as they spread out of their heads. What I don't understand, Emmett whispered, a somber expression forming on his face, is why we saw Renesmee inside the imaginative and prescient, but, there has been no signal in any way of any other toddler. He set free a heavy sigh, respiration his fears into the nighttime air, earlier than turning to have a look at me. No offense, Edward, however if there is a manner for us to have children, I might be placing it into practice at the primary opportunity. You understand how lengthy Rose has waited for this. I nodded. I'd wondered about that too. For a moment, we fell into silence, every folks preoccupied with our very own mind. An surprising concept all at once occurred to Jasper, however, and at once had my eyes snapping in his course. It's no longer viable, I stated firmly with a shake of my head. We're too exclusive. Are we? Of course we are. It would be like looking to mate a goldfish with a shark. Edward, Emmett probed. What did I omit? Jasper is questioning whether or not it might be possible for a vampire and a human female to make a toddler the regular way. Emmett's forehead momentarily creased in thought, his pursed lips signaling the lightning brief turning of cogs within his thoughts. It makes sense. What? No, it does not. It makes no feel in any respect. It is now not possible. How do you recognize? It is not like Carlyle has ever done any assessments. It really is because, and there are legends of an incubus vampire. Yes, but, the simplest way we ever going to recognize, Jasper interrupted, is if we do some studies. With the intention to amount to nothing, I responded adamantly, folding my fingers. What vampire ought to ever have intercourse with a human and leave them alive? Edward, you are case in point that is viable. Now not yet. But you will be, and also you comprehend it. All over again, we sank into silence, distracted by using our very own reflections. The night changed into silver and red to my eyes, every part and floor illuminated by using the gentle mild of the moon. Past the fortress grounds, the timber of the forbidden wooded area caressed the wintry weather air. A few were nonetheless dressed in their evergreen foliage, however others had shed their leaves, and stood like twisted, ungloved palms, attaining up in the direction of the sky. Mist crept out at the edges, settling over the floor like a silver-blue blanket, slowly freezing the winter earth. Mild hooting can be heard because it echoed from the Ollery, along with the gentle fluttering of wings. I was in Edward's footwear, Emmett concept wistfully. He doesn't realize how lucky he is. You incorrect. I recognize higher than every person. It was the truth. I might long gone from a dull, lonely purgatory to an infinite heaven due to the fact Bella had stumbled into my existence. Emmett hunched forwards, his head falling into his arms. This isn't going to help Rose. You know she's simply going to desire she ought to take Bella's location. Of root, what maternal girl would not? Who wouldn't need Renesmee for a daughter? She will be the most stunning, enthralling toddler inside the records of the arena, shimmering alabaster pores and skin stained with rose, and huge harmless eyes the color of milk chocolate, all framed via a mass of thick, bronze curls. no person of their right mind wouldn't be jealous. Proper then, I made a snap decision, the type one knew I ought to have idea twice about. I took a long, deep breath, and whispered, "I've seen your son." With the rate of a bullet, Emmett's head shot out of his fingers. His mind held all of the shock that I'd felt the primary time I would visible Renesmee, as his piercing eyes bore into mine, attempting to find a few sign of a cruel lie. I had to tell him. How may want I no longer? It had crossed my mind earlier that I must keep the knowledge of the boy to myself, simply in case this all became out to be a hopeless wild goose chase. Having stated that, Hogwarts' revelation did testify the truth of Bella's dream. Renesmee would be born someday, of that I used to be decided. I cherished her an excessive amount of now to allow myself to agree with otherwise, and if she became fated to turn out to be an indispensable part of my fact, I saw no motive why the boy could not emerge as a part of Emmett's and Rosalie's. He too, after all, turned into far too lovable to were constructed only from easy imagination. At the day that Gryffindor performed Ravenclaw, I started out carefully. I met Bella outside inside the Quidditch stadium. She'd been restless within the night time. It changed into early. I helped her get to sleep. Most effective her protect wasn't up when she began to dream. I saw it all play out in her mind. She turned into status on one aspect of a valley with Rosalie, who was certain in chains, with clocks connected to the links. There was a bloody river intersecting the valley. On the other aspect were youngsters. The female looked precisely the same as the one we saw in the vision Renesmee. There was another although a boy sitting in the distance. Emmett inhaled sharply. Jasper felt the hope swelling in his chest as he fed off our brother's emotion. He had your hair the color of ebony and Rosalie's violet eyes. His skin become like ours, but he had the same rosy cheeks as Renesmee. I think he changed into sitting similarly away because due to the fact he will arrive later. The fact of my revelation surprised even me. There have been components of the dream that I hadn't absolutely taken into consideration until now, however as soon as I did, the symbolic that means rang in my head just like the clashing of cymbals, not possible to ignore. Emmett's breath started coming and stepping into quick, choppy gasps. I should hear the doubt in his thoughts, however it changed into overshadowed with the aid of a desperate longing to fulfill his spouse's innermost desires. On pinnacle of that, he preferred the same element that she did, especially after listening to my revelation. It became only a dream, he stated, shaking his head. A dream prophetic sufficient to herald Renesmee, I reminded him. If Bella could foresee our infant, what could stop her from foreseeing yours? Stillness settled over us once more like a thick coverlet. Emmett turned into busy soaking up my bombshell, constructing the face of his son in his mind, at the same time as Jasper became thinking how we might be able to perform the things the Sphinx had promised. Eventually, Emmett broke the quiet. Will he be lovely? I chuckled lowly below my breath. Of path. The face of the little boy still swam in my brother's head as we sat through our first elegance that Wednesday morning. My ideal reminiscence once more had her available, and now not lengthy after our alternate on the top of the astronomy tower, I had furnished my brother with a comic strip of his destiny son. Emmett was thrilled with my depiction, and became now greater determined than ever to uncover that means of Hogwarts' riddle. Hidden in a bell jar inside the stomach of London, hidden in a bell jar within the belly of London, the stomach of London. The day trudged with the aid of rather slowly. After our lesson with Professor Trelawney, my brothers and I headed off to the library, filling our loose length with studies on vampire incubi. Regardless of our efforts, even though we discovered nothing beneficial, a few of the unrestricted cabinets, which turned into why, after classes had ended for the day, the three of us decided to pay a go to Carlisle and Esme. Boys, our mother cried upon starting her door to us. The smile she wore touched her eyes, and it changed into much less than a 2D before she pulled us all right into a tight, affectionate hug. Ah, mother, Emmett complained, rolling his eyes as she placed a kiss on his cheek. Take it like a man, or I'll provide you with detention. She swiftly ushered us over the edge, into her luxuriously provided workplace, where we were greeted by way of Carlisle, Professor Slughorn, and a stern searching Professor Martin, all of whom were seated at the mahogany table across the room. The sight of the humans, obviously, planted a budding seed of curiosity, which grew because the seconds exceeded. Horrible idea, concept Martin. Even if it has capability, it doesn't change the fact that it's wrong unnatural. What is going on? I puzzled aloud, looking over the seated men. My eyes flitted to the thick book laid out earlier than them, the pages of which had been browning and tatty round the rims. I felt the furrow seam between my eyes as I examined the words. They were indecipherable, written in a language that became completely foreign to me. Beside the book sat the magnifying glass which Bella had offered my father for Christmas. It gleamed in the lamplight, the gold of its deal with accentuated with the aid of the yellow glow. After being foiled by means of the ancient symbols at the pages, I reverted to extracting records any other manner, and dived back into the mind of Professor Martin, who soon revealed the nature of the textual content. I inhaled sharply, placing my brothers at once on area. Carlyle, what are you doing with that? To mention I was disturbed would have been a huge understatement. The anxiety turned into palpable. Every nerve in my body prickled electrically. I couldn't move. Horror rooted me to the spot. My father sat in identical stillness as he backed my stare, refusing to break the silence. I pointed to the tome. It is darkish magic. Slughorn sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose. You rewrite, Edward, it's far. That is why it isn't really worth our time. Martin huffed, gesturing to the e-book, his nostril wrinkling with disgust. But what if it helps, Wyatt? We've got exhausted all other opportunities. No. Professor Martin disagreed with a shake of his head. I don't agree with that. There must be something else, Horace. And by the point we discover it, the Longbottoms could be too antique for it to advantage them. Jasper improved, sensing the tension inside the room. After throwing out a wall of calm, he regarded questioningly at Carlyle. It gives guidance on a way to make an effective restorative potion, our father found out, stroking the open page, but like Edward Said, it involves a variety of dark magic. The identical dark magic the Dark Lord used to regenerate. Spat Professor Martin, his fist coming down on the desk. Jasper launched any other soothing wave, this time aiming it specially on the irritated defense teacher. If that is the case, Carlyle, Emmett spoke up, you need to close that book and position it again in which you determined it. Ultimately, someone, other than me, is speaking some sense. Oh, hush, Wyatt. Slughorn chided. Carlyle stood from his location, picking the book and magnifier from the desk, earlier than drawing close my brothers and me. I do not suggest to use the ideal method given inside the e-book, he murmured. The motive of this spell is to provide the issue a frame. Then how is this applicable to Frank and Alice? I asked, too intrigued now to keep my tongue. Carlyle shrugged. The simplest aspect I am interested by is the restorative issue. Here, appearance. He held out the book and the interpretation device. Emmett took them from him. In spite of his eager interest, he treated the dark, ancient tome as though it would fall apart to pieces at any minute, cradling it as lightly as one would a newborn infant. Collectively, we read the words through the magnifier. The historic symbols converted as the glass traveled over them, revealing the hidden which means. You see, said Carlyle, the potion itself is only a restorative, and may be tailor-made to healthy one's cause. It's what you add afterwards which determines the give-up end result. My eyes searched his. The hope they contained changed into without problems discernible, glowing like sapphires, accordingly making it tough for me to voice my doubts. It's an interesting concept, Jasper stated, but I do not understand how you'd adapt it for the Longbottoms. They do not need new bodies in the end. No, they don't, stated Carlyle. They need to have their minds restored. And how exactly are you going to try this? The eldest vampire ran a hand through his golden hair as he pondered the way to word his reply. Ultimately, after his palms had dropped lower back to his sides, he stated, you know my theory concerning Frank and Alice. You suspect their reminiscence shut all the way down to protect them from what befell with the Demise Eaters, I nodded. Right. There's simply one problem with that concept. Which is, they both nevertheless seem to understand Neville. I was there while he visited them during the holidays. Most effective it didn't occur to me till when I acquired the scans that shouldn't have been the case. They shouldn't recollect something or every person from their past, or so the scans could imply. I will bite, Emmett decided. He turned into nevertheless skeptical, and greater than a touch uncomfortable. Okay, why do they realize him? Esme joined the communique then, stepping forwards to vicinity an arm round her husband's waist. Carlyle thinks the solution lies in their DNA. The eyes of my brothers narrowed with confusion as we waited for our adoptive mom to tricky. Frank and Alice's blood runs in Neville. The reality that they comprehend him is probably because of the unique fact that magic lives inside the blood of witches and wizards, consequently developing a powerful link among discern and infant. Like Jasper and Emmett, I gave a cautious nod of knowledge. What my mother and father had told us thus far seemed reasonable, however I nevertheless hadn't grasped how they would use this information to their gain. Neville is the next generation after Frank and Alice, Carlyle breathed carefully. His DNA is their tie to the destiny, apprehend. Sure, I chorused with my brothers. Their past, therefore, lies in their parents' DNA, yes. Yes, now, right here's the principle. If we integrate the restorative with the DNA of the Longbottoms' past, in conjunction with that of their destiny, I agree with that we may be able to anchor them in time, so to talk via blood, it is able to be feasible to reconnect them mentally with the past and the destiny. Once more, Carlyle's eyes twinkled with wish as he looked to Emmett, Jasper and me for our critiques. I wanted to help him, truly, however what he became suggesting sounded so far-fetched that I could not convey myself to encourage it. It's a long shot. However well worth a try, Edward. And if it does not be successful, what about Neville? He is going to be devastated. Of root he is. Professor Martin interceded, rising from his chair. He marched stiffly over to Carlyle, leaving Slughorn sighing to himself at the back of the room. I am sorry, Carlyle, but the possibilities of this running are slender to none. On pinnacle of that, Alice Longbottom's parents are dead. How do you expect to get what you want from them when they may be 6 feet under? First rate, Emmett concept, his mind loaded with sarcasm as he stared on at Wyatt Martin, who stood earlier than our dad and mom in his gray fit, white shirt, pink tie, and polished brown shoes, fingers located firmly on his hips in a show of stubborn displeasure. Carlyle shifted uncomfortably, his expression sheepish as he grew to fulfill Martin. I used to be considering exhuming the bodies. In the issuing seconds, even the humans within the room were able to distinguish the drop of a pin. Carlyle's admission was met with a deathly silence. The sinister subject matter had each one folks on part. I was nevertheless seeking to decide on the right reaction while Professor Martin next spoke. If it had been a depend of willing offerings, you might have been capable of sway me. I am sure Neville and his grandmother will jump at the danger to participate, but whilst unearthing graves comes into it on the subject of unconsented sacrifices he gave an obstinate shake of his head, meeting my father with a grim expression. This is dark certainly. I won't have any part in it. And with that, he quitted the room, by no means stopping as soon as to appearance back. Slughorn, in the meantime, did not upward push from his chair, and started pensively stroking his chin as he deliberated the chance of fulfillment. Horace, it is crazy. Genuinely bonkers in case you ask me, and the chances of it running are slim. The trainer reached for a heavy-based crystal glass half full of an amber-colored liquid. I sniffed as he gave the fluid a swirl, my nose wrinkling after I known the fragrance of whiskey. He took a sip, swallowed, and flashed a grin as he leaned lower back in his chair. Matter me in. Carlyle chuckled, before turning again to Emmett, Jasper and me, properly. My eyes flitted to my brothers, neither of whom seemed especially passionate about the idea of collaborating. Jasper shook his head. I don't know. You heard what Professor Martin stated. This is dark territory you are heading into. Carlyle nodded. And if Alice was nevertheless in the same function that the Longbottoms are now, what then, Jasper? Would you do it for her? For someone you loved, might you risk it? The question touched a nerve. I may want to hear that a good deal in Jasper's thoughts. None people preferred to imagine what it had been like for Alice inside the asylum, but we couldn't deny the chance that she were in a similar state of affairs to Neville's dad and mom. Darkish magic, even though turned into that the proper nature of love. Could it drag humans to such a perilous, sinister region? You don't need me to answer that, the empath answered, his voice low and rough. You realize what I'd do if it were Alice. Carlyle nodded solemnly. If there's each person you need to be asking approximately this though, it's her. The Longbottoms can determine for themselves, so why don't you ask a person who's been in their shoes? He's right, Esme murmured, her arms transferring lightly over her husband's abdomen, easing away a number of his tension. Besides, she is probably capable to tell us whether or not we re at the right tune. A minute later, Jasper, Emmett and I have been exiting our dad and mom office. Carlyle had written us a be aware that might allow the three folks get entry to the restrained section of the library. He did not query our thirst for expertise of our species. Instead, he took it as a natural impulse. Alice met us on our way along the fifth ground corridor, having foreseen that her husband might request she go to Carlyle and Esme in there have a look at. Rosalie became with her. Together, they went to convey their reviews to our parents. I watched the scene unfold as I made my way to the library with my brothers. Alice informed our father that she supported his plan. They name vampirism the darkish crescent, however I have in no way as soon as regretted what I am. I have to have been more undead as a human than I am now. I don't think it matters whether the magic you use for that is light or darkish, as long as it hurts nobody and you act with pure intentions. Turned into my sister proper. Maybe. Either manner, I had more essential matters to keep in mind that night. I spent all night within the restrained section with Jasper and Emmett, but there have been 3 full bookcases to discover, all stacked with chunky, dirt-included manuscripts involved with vampirism. We determined not anything that night, or the next, but we took every opportunity to look the texts to be had to us. Whilst Bella became away at Quidditch practice, I was inside the library. Whilst she became in class throughout my unfastened durations, I was inside the library. Fortuitously, she changed into so overwhelmed with work for her NEWTs, she didn't have time to impeach me about my surprising fascination with vampire-associated cloth. Sadly, I too had an extreme workload, which meant that I was frequently compelled from one section of the library to some other, albeit reluctantly. It wasn't till the Valentine's Day weekend, the day we were due to go to Hogsmeade, that my brothers and I discovered something of consequence. We might been inside the library all night, another time, and it become 5 to 6 inside the morning. The sky became a deep blue, the sun still lingering somewhere underneath the horizon far out in the east. My ears discerned abnormal buzzing. It changed into thoroughly traumatic, and I had no concept where it turned into coming from. It turned into too loud to be that of a not unusual housefly. I felt my forehead crease in puzzlement, before I positioned it out of my head altogether. "Edward, Jazz," called Emmett. The 2 people without delay stopped what we have been doing, our heads snapping in our brother's direction. Jasper jumped up from his chair and went to stand at the back of him, however I kept my position. Emmett's ebook was open on a page entitled The Western Incubus. Through the appears of it, the textual content became pretty cutting-edge, through Hogwarts standards besides, and could only worsen a long-time antique, as adverse to 3 centuries. The green leather-based binding changed into smooth and undamaged, and the pages have been nevertheless crisp and white. Emmett pointed to the outlet paragraph, and said excitedly, "Here. I assume this is probably it." "What does it say?" Jasper advised. I listened as Emmett studied the words aloud. According to the book, there has been hearsay of a brand new kind of vampire lurking in South the USA, one that could impregnate women together with his immortal spawn. The simplest evidence indicating that such vampires exist lies within the words of Brazilian people memories. There may be no substance within the incubus story in any way. It can simply offer a method for superstitious muggles to provide an explanation for the mysterious disappearances of young ladies from the nearby villages. According to legend, the incubus vampire seduces girls with the aim of impregnating them. Although it isn't possible for female vampires to conceive, the tale indicates that a male vampire and human girl could together produce a hybrid toddler, one possessing the strength and velocity of the daddy, at the side of the mother's capability to trade and develop into adulthood. Little is thought approximately the character of vampire offspring, but the tribe's human beings of Brazil accept as true with them to be evil creatures, owning a food regimen in the direction of that in their faith. An involuntary hiss burst up my throat, bringing my brother to a surprising forestall. He gazed at me uncertainly. "Edward." The table splintered underneath my grip, the timber grain reworking into sawdust. "She isn't evil, I promised." The 2 of them shook their heads. Jasper made use of his powers, trying to pacify me with some other wave of tranquility, which, admittedly, helped quite a chunk. "She's no longer." We realized that, he insisted frivolously. "Of path we do. We noticed her crying while Bella went to fight, keep in mind." Emmett nodded. "She's a bit girl. No longer a monster." My chest trembled as I exhaled. I desired to take the e-book and rip it to shreds for the mere proposal that my Renesmee would be something but the incredible, loving toddler I would discover. Finally, my anger faded into something less competitive, till it is able to be described as little greater than moderate irritation. With my composure regained, I nodded for Emmett to hold. The passage gave little greater away. The best additional aspect we learnt was that such kids inherited immortality upon accomplishing maturity. Do you think it is actually possible? Jasper grinned mischievously. Most effective one way to discover. I needed he hadn't stated that. All it did become provide gas for the shameless degenerate sniggering contrary me. Emmett's eyebrows wiggled suggestively. Bella's proven you her magic wand. 'Bout time you lower back the favor, Dante you watched. The pair shook in opposition to the desk, heads thrown returned because the library rang with the sound in their bellowing pleasure. I rose slowly from my chair, greater indignant than irritated. Their tasteless comments were not sufficient to push me over the edge. I was too satisfied for that. I am renaming the pair of you, I advised them lightly. Allow or not it is acknowledged by using all here dwelleth my heinous brothers, the benchmarks of evil. I marched determinedly away, leaving behind the hoots and cackling of said monsters, and rolled my eyes when they started speaking bets. I'll bet something that Bella knocked up on the first night time of the honeymoon, stated Jasper. I sighed as I became the corner. I expected it of Emmett, but it nonetheless in no way ceased to amaze me how our empathic brother ought to act like this type of scoundrel while he changed into so nicely behaved in the business enterprise of women. Emmett guffawed. All right, I bet that he doesn't maintain out that lengthy. The phrases, oh, this should be exact. Jasper and Emmett had been hilarious when they have been feeling competitive. Jasper patted his chin with his index finger, throwing ideas round in his head. Subsequently, concept hit. I snorted loudly, the sound echoing down the corridor. My brothers heard it, and Emmett became at once suspicious. Dude, they were given it, Jazz cackled. The loser has to provide a complete performance in drag and I am speak me heels, leotard, wig, the whole shebang to Beyoncé's single women, in a homosexual bar, at the night time of satisfaction. For a second, Emmett regarded hesitant, but was quickly spurred on via the sight of the empath's mocking expression. He threw again his head, guffawed, and sang, "You going down, bro." Poor Bella she turned into in for an traumatic 12 months. On my way back to the common room, I sensed my sisters. Alice and Rosalie had been walking at complete pelt within the path of Gryffindor Tower, each in their minds filled with alarm. My legs right away pumped into a dash, sending me flying up the grand staircase like a maniac riding a rocket. What the hell, Alice? I hissed, preventing at the foot of the girl's stairway. She and Rosalie nonetheless hadn't arrived, however I knew she heard me. I do not know, Edward. She simply disappeared completely. The whole dorm has. Panic surged inner me, and despite the fact that I didn't require air to stay, my chest rose and fell at an accelerated tempo. I desperately wanted to fly up the steps, but if this grew to become out to be a false alarm, I'd emerge as alerting the students for not anything. Gryffindor Tower changed into a tranquil region at sunrise. Gentle mild filtered in via the window, now not pretty robust sufficient to absolutely banish the shadows. The portrait figures continued to snore in their frames, making the most of their time by myself inside the not unusual room. Quietly, I listened for the sound of Bella's respiratory, picking it out nearly right away from a few of the gentle snores of the alternative sleepers. She was sound asleep peacefully. As far as I should inform, not anything untoward became occurring within the ladies' dormitory. Even when I checked the secret agent band, I discovered nothing threatening. She smiled in her sleep, her lengthy smooth hair fanned out throughout her pillow. I heard no footsteps no indication of any overseas mind, simply the serene inhalations of the Gryffindor College students and that maddening infernal buzzing. What became it? Wherein turned into it coming from? I frowned because it moved higher, seeming to flow to the upper dormitories. A flash of gold and inky black shot by means of me as my sisters whizzed up the stairs, my hair and garments ruffling at their velocity. In spite of their situation, Alice and Rosalie have been careful to make as little noise as viable as they entered the room wherein Bella slept. I jumped into the mind of my psychic sister, looking as she tiptoed over to the four-poster in which the mesmerizing witch turned into resting, her limbs tangled with the sheets. I do not apprehend, Alice's idea as a brand new imaginative and prescient danced behind her eyes. She noticed Bella and me together. We had been seated at a small table, our arms interlaced as we stared into one another's eyes. A golden cherub floating overhead showered us with pink confetti. The vision turned into certainly short time period, for the area was Madame Puddifoot's tea keep, which we would reputedly be traveling later today throughout the Hogsmeade go-to. Rosalie arched an eyebrow, smirking as she turned to stand our sister. Sorry, Alice, however I suppose you are losing your contact. I am not, the psychic whispered returned, her voice too low to disturb the humans. A glance of indignation settled on her face. I held lower back a snigger, now not looking to offend her further. Something is messing with my vision. You've got been announcing that for weeks. It truly is due to the fact we are at Hogwarts. There is always going to be something getting inside the manor here. It is like I am permanently receiving defective reception. Alice sighed and shook her head, before inhaling a deep calming breath through her nose. Her eyes snapped open suddenly at the trace of a weird scent. What is that? Rosalie sniffed too, her forehead furrowing with confusion. It is familiar. I have surely encountered it before. Together, they crept in the direction of Bella, both continuing to look at the fragrance, until they have been hovering at once over her. Without saying a phrase, Alice sunk to her knees, her nostril nevertheless running furiously. Ordinarily the heady scent is strongest around her throat. My frame tensed at once. As gently as was inhumanly in all likelihood, in order not to wake the dreaming female, my darkish-haired sister pulled on the neckline of Bella's Icinus pajamas, revealing a sliver of her ivory pores and skin, together with a silver chain, upon which there normally hung a small sparkling diamond. Rosalie stiffened, eyes widening as the realization dawned on her. Her fingers flew to her left wrist, where she anxiously tugged lower back her sleeve. She sighed whilst she saw that her glittering bracelet was still intact. The piece turned into encrusted with the handfuls of tiny abatwood diamonds she and Emmett had gathered on the Quidditch World Cup. Suddenly, the buzzing made sense. The girls scanned the room for in-addition evidence. Certain enough, the stones from Lavender's earrings had been missing. All this problem over a fairy. I chuckled lowly as my sisters re-entered the commonplace room. I bet they have come to reclaim. Alice nodded, fingering her own bracelet thoughtfully. I wonder if we going to see him or her. We need to in all likelihood provide those returned. Rosalie snorted and crossed her arms. Believe her to be stubborn. They may be no longer ours to maintain, Rose. I understand that, but study this component. She flashed her bracelet for Alice and me to peer. No person at that suit caught as many diamonds as we did. The fairy we supply them back to can have a better risk than anyone at winning the Abatwa crown. We ought to ensure they re-worth first. If I am now not impressed, I will be obliged to preserve my bracelet. How noble of you. I rolled my eyes, by some means dealing with to suppress an incredulous snigger, some things by no means modified. All day, I saved a lookout for the traveling African fairy, but I never caught a glimpse of the sneaky monarch wannabe. I persisted to hear the buzzing of wings as the Abatwa traveled via Hogwarts on the again of his or her puppy insect. After I placed all my attention into it, I ought to even make out the tenor of an inhuman mind. It become very difficult to preserve music of although, and I was infrequently amazed that I hadn't noticed it the first time I would looked for the intruder. I could not listen any actual thoughts, however I used to be able to make out a feel of mounting greed and ambition. In the end, I had to conclude that this ruthless stranger, whoever he or she is probably, could visit any measures to win the fairy crown. Bella changed into relatively amused when I shared the discovery together with her, and delighted in her missing diamond. Therefore in comes disbelieving stare from my sisters, each of whom appeared the witch as though she were loopy. Overlooked diamonds, Rosalie notion, eyes wide. Lady S lost her marbles. What am I able to say? Bella stated later as we wandered via Honeydukes. I am simply now not the sort of individual to drool over sparkly things. Unexpectedly, she stopped quick, her eyes glazing over as she stood inventory nonetheless, earlier than inevitably turning to examine me. A depraved smirk creeping onto her face. Surely, scratch that. I laughed loudly, inflicting some human beings nearby to crane their heads in our route. I should probably spend more day trip inside the sun then. Truly, since it became Valentine's Day, I purchased a few strawberry hearts for Bella. As the name indicated, The treats were heart-formed strawberries, only they had been covered in a diffusion of coatings, such as white, milk and darkish chocolate, and yogurt and honey. A magical attraction triggered them to imitate the pulsing action of a beating coronary heart. After I placed a hand on Bella's abdomen, I could sense their rhythm play out in her belly. In return, she bought me another DIY cocktail package. The sight alone made my mouth water, now not within the literal experience of root, on the grounds that I used to be nevertheless feeling the high-quality results of my breakfast. Despite my preference, I insisted that she should feel obligated to repeat the gesture she executed after our previous experience to Hogsmeade. As expected, although, she brushed off my issues with assurances that she desired to. "It's not as if it hurts me to do it," she said as we exited the shop. We began on foot at a leisurely tempo inside the direction of Madame Cutefoot's. Bella were the one to suggest the go-to, even though I already knew we'd end up there. Her reasoning, it became out, turned into that she'd never been to the tea keep on Valentine's Day, on the grounds that she'd in no way had a date to accompany her in her previous years at Hogwarts. It has to sting a little, I worried, thinking of the remaining time she'd used her wand to extract a drop of blood from her finger. Bella shook her head. "No longer that I consider," I would have argued. However, I did not need to darken the day with quarrels and pessimism, so, as an alternative, I opted to maintain my mouth shut. It became February, and frost still lingered inside the grasses. The window panes and door frames of the Hogsmeade structures sparkled with a skinny, white glaze of ice and frozen dewdrops. Bella's ears were blanketed by using an infant blue hat made from thick wool, an identical headband and gloves protected her neck and fingers. Her nose had grew to become an unlovable crimson as it continued the biting bloodless, and she sighed with remedy as we stepped into the warm temperature of the tea shop. Luckily, a table by the hearth have become to be had as Draco Malfoy and Astoria Greengrass rose to depart. Outwardly, Draco exuded an air of irritation. His lips were pressed tight, whilst his brow pulled down right into a frown. "Bloody cherubs," he muttered, mussing the confetti from his white blonde hair. Astoria Daphne Greengrass' sister giggled on the sight of him. "Lovely." Draco rolled his eyes, but the trace of a smile tugged faintly at the corners of his lips, the handiest indicator of the emotion undulating underneath the surface. "Surprise as she's having a very good time. I need to ask her if she wants to dangle out greater regularly." "What if she says no though?" Draco bit his lip, the cautiously concealed positivity morphing into a downcast expression. After a few seconds, however, he perked up, remembering that Goyle had confided in him in advance in the week, after overhearing a conversation among Daphne and Astoria, wherein the latter had admitted to being completely smitten with a sure blonde-haired Slytherin. His expression fast soured while he noticed my presence. Astoria reacted in a comparable style, her countenance turning into icy as her eyes landed on me. Neither had been especially thrilled when they remembered I may want to hear each unmarried one among their private, besotted thoughts. Even as they each belonged to Slytherin House, that failed to always suggest I wanted to lead them to sense uncomfortable, which became why I stored my gaze constant firmly on Bella, pretending to be oblivious to all else but her. Bella ordered a pot of tea and a scone smeared with raspberry jam and clotted cream. I was content definitely to look at, for there has been nevertheless no hint of the burn in my throat. A single tea mild contained inside a purple glass holder burned at the center of the table, supplying satisfactory tender lighting in the in any other case darkened room. Madame Cutefoot must have determined that shadows and candlelight would higher suit the Valentine surroundings, since it allowed visiting couples a sure diploma of intimacy. Despite the low lights, Blaise Zabini nonetheless managed to realize Bella from throughout the room. He becomes sitting within the a long way corner with Pansy Parkinson, his eyes fixed at the girl beside me. I amassed from his thoughts that he wasn't overly interested in his date. His handiest cause for spending time alone with her turned into that he changed into too proud to be visible spending the holiday on my own, and on account that Pansy become one of the most popular women in Slytherin, it had made sense to him to accept her provide. A masks of bloodless indifference disguised his internal despair, which turned into possibly why his date simplest skilled a moderate flare of jealousy whilst she spotted my fiancé. "Ew, I notion I sniffed a skeptic tank," she leered, purposely filling her acerbic voice with useless extent. Bella clucked a pointy snigger. Cockney rhyming slang. Once again, how very unique. After 8 years, ULL assumed she would have bored with the Yank jokes. Her palms drummed impatiently against the table, a demonstration of her infection. If Pansy had it her manner, the complete faculty would have had me pegged as a tasteless American idiot from day one. I hate that stereotype. I shrugged. Do I appear like an American fool? Bella tugged off her coat and flung it over the back of her chair. Be critical, she answered, hurriedly unwinding the headscarf from around her neck. I am severe, I returned at her. I had a point, and I was decided to it. Well, of root you do not. You are a vampire. I nodded. I is probably plenty of things, but I was maximum sincerely not an idiot. Do you suspect the opposite college students suppose I am an fool? In which are you going with this? She requested, eyes narrowing with suspicion. Simply solution the question. Bella sighed and shook her head. Do you think they accept as true with that you re an idiot? No, properly, then, irrespective of how often positive pathetic people attempt to promote a stereotype, the fact stays that the general public see it for what it is, far a load of rubbish. It is nonetheless traumatic that we re-stereotyped it, although her fingers have been welded collectively on the table pinnacle. They were clasped so tightly that her knuckles had grew to become white. I didn't experience seeing her so tense it made me uncomfortable, which turned into why I felt the want to attain across to her and prise her arms aside. She shivered at the touch, but additionally regarded to loosen up, particularly once I started thumbing the gentle skin of her fingers. Nearly every body hates typecasting, Bella, but you need to remember the fact that it works two methods. If the stereotypes had been authentic, all of your British pals could be cut up into two classes: light higher class snobs with horse enamel, who hunt foxes for fun and talk the Queen's English, or pasty cockneys with negative dental hygiene, who stay on a diet of fish and chips and nothing else. We each seemed around the room then, examining the humans sitting at the neighboring tables. The range of accents become excellent: Yorkshire, West U.S., Mancunian, Scouser, Geordie, Welsh, Scottish, Black Country, East Anglian, South Japanese, and so on. The skin tones numerous to porcelain and cream have been dominant, attributable to the weak spot of the sun's rays. The UK rested on strains of latitude even better than those of Forks. I questioned in short whether or not Bella's pores and skin could were of a darker color if she spent her youngster years in Arizona, in place of Scotland. Likely not. Darker skin tones have been also gift in the tea shop. Moreover, almost all and sundry in the location possessed a hard and fast of best, milky teeth. Only idiots accept as true with stereotypes, Bella. We've got ours thanks to Jerry Springer, diverse politicians, and a touch aspect referred to as MTV. The British have theirs because of Mary Poppins and loads of years' worth of inbred aristocracy, the latter of which Pansy Parkinson in all likelihood descends from. I obtained a swat to my shoulder at that closing comment. Now you re-stereotyping. My palms shot up in defense. A watch for an eye fixed, love. After some greater giggles on the problem, the communique proceeded into extra romantic territory. I barely observed the showers of confetti that fell from above, due to the fact I used to be too busy admiring the depth of Bella's eyes and every line of her creamy face. When I did, it most effective served in reminding me of our coming near wedding, which had me grinning maniacally, especially once I remembered the capacity made of that future union. Extra than once, I contemplated whether or not I should discover a way to tell Bella approximately Renesmee. The spell achieved by means of Occaret, however, changed into in full impact. That means that such mind had been constantly observed by way of an awesome feel of foreboding. I didn't reside on them for lengthy therefore, and settled simply on loving Bella with each fiber of my being. Her heart thudded in her chest as I leaned in nearer, a lot to my pleasure. I like you, I whispered, brushing my lips throughout her cheek. The warmth of her pores and skin elevated at my contact, radiating like hearth in opposition to my wintry flesh. I didn't like the table setting apart us, and so I reached around for her chair. She flinched as I lifted it off the ground, my hand resting beneath the seat to aid her weight. Lightly, I placed it down beside my personal, and interlaced our hands underneath the table. Bella leaned forwards, her heady scent rippling via the air as her breath fanned across my face. I inhaled it deeply, thankful for the absent burn of the venom. Even without the standard predatory preference, the lavender odor was still intoxicating. After Madame Putafoot's, Bella and that I made our way to Scrivenshaft's quill save. Bella had worn down the nib on her own quill, and so I purchased her a new one crafted from a gold and black striped pheasant feather, in conjunction with a selection of different colored inks to replenish her writing package. We joined Carlisle and Esme in the Three Broomsticks for the remaining hour of the go-to. My brothers and sisters had been nowhere to be seen. I couldn't find their mind both, and concluded that each couples had been using the excuse of Valentine's Day to spend some nice time by myself. Neville joined us too, however he become followed by way of Hannah Abbott, and so it turned into not the most appropriate time to speak about Carlisle's plan. Whilst Esme and the girls went to purchase extra liquids, however, Carlisle controlled to provide the wizard a brief summary of his development. "How darkish are we speaking right here?" Neville murmured, careful to ensure he would not be overheard. My father frowned. "Well, a number of the substances are fairly distinctive, and the potion would require the DNA of you and your family individuals." "DNA? Blood, preferably. We are going to tweak the elements a good way to benefit your parents," however Carlisle trailed off. "How do I inform him?" Neville waited. When my father failed to keep, his inquisitive eyes became on me alternatively. A good way to spare Carlisle, I speedily defined to the boy that the restorative we had in mind become the equal one Voldemort had used to provide himself a body, with a few tweaks of course, as Carlisle had already referred to. The more I unveiled, the more and more conflicted Neville regarded to end up. He listened sullenly until I finished, yet all of the even as he fidgeted in his seat, his fingers gambling restlessly around the base of his pewter tankard, which changed into overflowing with frothy, amber butter beer. The ladies back before Neville may want to voice a reaction, but I listened to his thoughts as he moodily deliberated the proposal. On the one hand, he was disgusted on the opportunity of having to hotel to comparable strategies as the vanquished Darkish Lord. On the other, he wanted his dad and mom. Who ought to blame him? He changed into silent at the manner returned to the fortress, most effective speaking while triggered. He nevertheless hadn't decided by the time we passed into the castle grounds. This didn't wonder me, considering the gravity of the matter. On numerous occasions over the route of the next few days, we requested Alice if she could see anything new concerning the Longbottoms, however each single time, her reaction became I might not be able to see till Neville comes to a decision. It was Tuesday night once I next approached him. Bella became in at 9, as quickly as we were given back from the library. Her NEWT assignments, whilst combined with Quidditch practice, were honestly starting to take their toll on her. The shadows under her eyes were constantly darker now than those beneath mine, which simply became now not correct when the comparison became among a human and a dwelling corpse. "Howdy, Neville, hold on." I referred to as. The wizard paused and became Edward. I joined him on the foot of the lad's staircase, leaving Rosalie and Emmett behind. Emmett become nonetheless sniggering after his nighttime scheming. He'd spent the ultimate 1/2 of the day looking to get Bella hot in. At one factor, he'd even produced a tray of oysters, insisting that Bella attempt a few. It's a human enjoy. He cried in his defense. After assuring Bella that the aphrodisiacs had not been tampered with in any way, she had obliged. Jasper were sniggering in his chair the complete time, his chuckles gaining volume while Emmett cracked out the dessert champagne and chocolate-blanketed strawberries. Regardless of her suspicions, Bella frequented them, which become when Emmett turned his attentions to Rosalie. He stroked along her collarbone, and ran a hand down her thigh within the hopes that Bella changed into paying attention. I watched her cautiously, knowing as I did that I shouldn't find the situation fun. I don't know why I took a lot delight in seeing her blush deepen, or in listening to her heartbeat accelerate, however I did. Alice and Jasper had disappeared quickly after. It regarded that the little show had affected my inky-haired sister as an awful lot as it had my human, and that I caught a glimpse of Alice's plan before she pulled her mate from the fort. They had crept out early to spend the night within the mountains, and would not be lower back until morning. "Have you ever thought approximately Carlisle's proposition?" I asked Neville, flinging all different thoughts apart. The wizard raked a hand through his hair and nodded. "Nevertheless, haven't decided although. Nobody expects you to reach a choice immediately. It is a big factor." I gave him an encouraging pat on the shoulder as we started out our climb up to our dorm. He appeared to comprehend the gesture, and smiled in go back. "What would you do, Edward, if it had been my parents?" "Definitely, I could not tell you. Neville's skepticism turned into clear within the furrow between his eyes. His eyebrows fashioned a deep verses as he frowned. We paused on the door to our room. I at ease against the body, at the same time as my human buddy slumped against the adjacent wall. If it have been Bella. It's specific, I said right now. I wouldn't even must suppose. Even supposing it intended you ought to use dark magic. Neville's eyes were as piercing as spears as he studied my reaction. Of all of the college students at Hogwarts, he changed into definitely one of the greater sensible, and certainly considered one of most brave. The reminiscence of him charging in the direction of the enemy for the duration of the conflict of Hogwarts would burn continually in my mind like Goobrathian hearth. Bella is the entirety. I already recognize I can't live without her. If I needed to topple an empire to keep her secure, I'd do it. A tiny smile pulled on the wizard's lips. That sounds quite darkish. I shrugged. It really is love, right? I guess. They do not alert you approximately that aspect of it within the fairy tales, although. I didn't reply, especially because Neville hadn't meant for me to pay attention his mind on the dualistic nature of affection. Nonetheless, I contemplated quietly what was starting to end up a recurring topic in my life: natural love as opposed to dark obsession. Wherein was the dividing line? Did someone's affections for any other character must fall on one particular aspect of that line, or did actual love encompass each? If I'd needed to attach a visual description to my love for Bella, I'd have imagined it as being something hot and white, just like the atoms burning on the middle of a celeb, or the plasma blasting off its surface, beautiful and incredible, but, due to that very intensity, it possessed just as plenty capability to come to be something violent and unfavorable. The irony had me throwing my head again with laughter. What's so funny? Asked Neville. I shook my head in opposition to the door. Not anything. Not anything is humorous. I was just questioning the greater I find out about love and its nature, the greater it scares the hell out of me. An abrupt chuckle echoed up from the commonplace room. Clever guy, chuckled Emmett. His words have been accompanied by using the unmistakable sound of Rosalie slapping him upside the head. With a roll of my eyes, I'd driven the door to the dormitory open. A wall of the maximum deliciously scented air without delay slammed against me, and I nearly staggered again with surprise. The mouth-watering smell stuffed my nose, causing my body to react inside the maximum herbal, carnal way. Venom flooded my mouth, desiccating it as handiest Bella's heady scent should. At the table beside my mattress sat a small plastic cup. It'd become one of these opaque kinds, with a lid and a straw. Bella must have used the DIY package she'd offered from Honeydukes at the weekend. The only element that surpassed via my mind within the sixth of a second it took me to react became the questioning of why Bella had selected to make the cocktail without me. Perhaps it changed into due to the fact she knew I failed to like to watch her extract the vital bead of blood. Regardless of the reason, I charged. A noisy mind abruptly demanded my attention as I lifted the cup. Blood. Concept Emmett. Charging from the commonplace room with Rosalie. They'd caught the fragrance after it had escaped the dormitory, and have been now fed on by way of a combination of each exhilaration and worry, overwhelmed by the deliciousness of the heady aroma. They want it for themselves. It's mine. I idea possessively. There was no manner I might allow them to have it. It have been left on my bedside table, by way of my mattress. It became intended for me. Last my lips across the straw, I sucked. Heat, bloody liquid surged over my tongue. Confusion beaten me as I swallowed. This didn't taste like Bella. Possibly she'd offered a defective batch. A brand new face grew in my thoughts as my brother and sister barreled into the dorm, halting beside a confused-looking Neville. I sucked at the straw again, pulling greater of the mysterious fluid into my mouth. Whether it tasted like Bella or not, it became nevertheless quite luscious. Edward, said Rosalie, eyes glued to my cup. I moaned, persevering with to drink as she licked her lips. The phrases of my siblings have been misplaced on me. I couldn't make sense of something, aside from the electrifying sensation on my tongue. Oh, it turned into delicious. Delectable. Awesome. Mouth-wateringly appetizing. Just like her. It had in no way struck me earlier than just how lovable the woman virtually changed into, with lengthy, ebony tresses cascading down her back like a black waterfall, and those eyes. So dark. By God, she became beautiful. I wanted to punch myself for no longer seeing it earlier than. Finally, the sound of the straw pulling at air could be heard. The cup dropped from my hand, clattering to the floor. Dude, grumbled my brother, that becomes so uncool. I cannot believe you wouldn't tea proportion. Rosalie tossed her hair, searching extraordinarily pissed. In case you assume you are getting an excellent Christmas present next year, you could forget it. What turned into that besides? I've in no way smelt something love it. I have, stated Emmett. And picture of a lady he had killed one nighttime erupted in his thoughts. Her blood had called to him as she stood in her garden, putting out her washing. However she died. I killed her, so why? I collapsed onto my bed with a sigh. I do not know why you have to appearance so happy, Rosalie snapped. Without a doubt, I desired to ask, did she now not see it? Became it now not plain on my face like a tattoo? Ah, Rosalie, Rosalie, Rosalie. Edward, is it now not obvious? Is what no longer apparent? I chuckled to myself, and rolled onto my facet to examine my sister. Stupid, I am in love. Rosalie frowned, her eyes flicking to her husband. Nicely, of course you went Romeo on us whilst you concept she died. In a burst of lightning pace, I launched at my sister, snarling like a maniac. Emmett slammed into me before I should attain his vicious, mendacity wife. I swiped at him in an effort to reach Rosalie, but he dodged. What the hell, Edward? I pointed furiously at Rosalie. She's mendacity. How dare she? How dare I what? Screamed the blonde vampire, her glistening tooth bared in anger. How dare you inform me that she is lifeless? She's no longer useless. If you've achieved whatever to her, I swear I'll rip you to portions. What the? Damn it, Edward, Emmett roared. Bella's excellent. She's asleep in her dorm. What has gotten into you? Bella. A hurry of calm unexpectedly washed over me. I felt myself smile, and grew to become round to stroll again to my mattress. Nicely, this is a remedy. Sorry, Rose. I notion you had been speaking approximately ma cherry. Exactly, Bella. What? No, I used to be speaking approximately Remilda. The eyes of my brother and sister bulged from their sockets, even as their mind had been propelled into a torrent of confusion. Rosalie gulped. I encourage your pardon. Remilda, I grinned. The love of my existence. Remilda Vane. BPOV. When I awoke after a peaceful night's sleep, two blurry figures were looming over me. I rubbed the sand from my eyes, and everything suddenly became a little clearer. I recognized Alice's inky halo, and Rosalie's tumbling golden locks. Morning, Bella, Alice said. I frowned. Her voice hadn't rung with its usual note of cheer. In addition, she wore a very uncharacteristic grimace, while Rosalie's expression could only be described as a scowl. What's going on? I demanded softly, instantly alert. The two exchanged wary glances. Alice. The vampire sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose as she clenched her eyes. Concerned, I sat up. It's Edward. At the mere mentioning of his name, my heart fluttered in its cage, but the pleasant anticipation was accompanied by a horrible sense of foreboding. When the elfin vampire refused to continue, I turned my eyes on her sister instead, noticing with increasing anxiety how tightly her hands were clenched. Rosalie inhaled a long deep breath, which caused her nostrils to flare and her chest to expand. For the longest time, she held it in what I perceived as a clear attempt to maintain her cool control. Finally, she growled, he drunk a love potion. One brief moment, and then, he what? My shriek woke the other girls, causing them to bolt upright in their beds. Wah, mumbled Lavender. Was happening? Who? I growled, flipping back the sheets. Rosalie's nose wrinkled in disgust. Remilda Vane. She left a cup of it by his bed. We didn't realize until after he drank it that, to him at least, it would have smelled just like you. I think he thought you made him a cocktail. I finished. Precisely. I sprung off the mattress, and quickly began to change out of my pajamas. Alice flung my uniform at me while she explained why she hadn't been able to stop her brother from consuming the love potion. She and Jasper had been away in the mountains when she had the vision they didn't have enough time to get back and prevent the premonition from becoming reality. Once I was fully dressed, the girls led me out of the dormitory and down into the common room. Edward was nowhere in sight. Alice explained that he was not willing to spend time in the company of the other Cullens, because he didn't want to hear the things they had to say. That didn't stop them from screaming their thoughts at him, but Edward refused to believe the accusation that Romilda had tricked him. "Where is he now?" I demanded, hurtling through the portrait hole. "Carlisle, Esme, Emmett and Jasper were waiting for us outside." "In one of the greenhouses," replied Alice through gritted teeth. "He's trying to find appropriate flowers for a bouquet. The only thing I want delivered to that BF stealing by Rosalie." "Which then," the golden-haired vampire huffed, following the scolding from her mother, "is a nice big pot of devil's snare." For once, Emmett didn't respond with his usual chuckle. His jaw was clenched so tightly that it could have bitten through steel, while his deep-set eyes were fierce and penetrating, his black pupils frighteningly small, emphasized all the more against the icy shade of his irises. "Get on, Bella," was all he said. He crouched while I climbed onto his back. Once I had locked my limbs around his neck and waist, he pushed off the ground and rocketed away, and was followed closely by the others. Together, we zoomed down the grand staircase. Our flight caused quite a stir amongst the portraits. I heard one or two complaining about our speed. Verlina the Virgin was particularly cross, since the rush of air disturbed her robes, and she had to hold them down, like a 17th-century version of Marilyn Monroe. Sir Cadogan, who resided on the opposite side of the staircase, looked momentarily enthralled, before the inevitable disappointment hit. Alice came to an unexpected stop once we reached ground level. I fell to the floor with a thud, after the abrupt halt caused me to break my grip. Jasper considerately helped me to my feet, before turning his attention back to his wife, whose glassy stare indicated a vision. "Bah!" she cried suddenly, throwing her hands into the air. Carlisle patted her gently on the shoulder. "What is it, Alice?" "It had to be the mind reader, didn't it? He can predict our every move. He knows we're going after him, so he's left the greenhouse." "And where is he going?" My heart hammered in my chest as the psychic's head fell into her hands. She looked annoyed beyond belief. "He's scaling the castle walls with the intention of climbing into Romilda's dormitory." "Oh, for heaven's sake!" cried Esme. I started at the sound of her raised voice. It was rare to see her lose her grip on her control. Even when we had faced the threat of the newborn army, the maternal vampire had always maintained a calm exterior, despite the pressing danger that she would lose a member of her family. Now, however, she looked completely peaked beneath narrowed hazel eyes. Her lips were pinched, no longer forming their usual glowing smile. Her arms were folded tightly across her chest, while her right foot tapped continuously against the hard floor. "Esme, this isn't Edward's fault," I reminded her. The vampire's indignant expression softened immediately. "I know that, Bella. It's not Edward the first I'm mad with. When this is all over, I am going to give Romilda Vane a month's worth of detention." That one small assurance filled me with a joyous, fuzzy warmth. It was like the promise of sunshine at the end of a hurricane. Unfortunately, Esme and Carlisle didn't escort us back to the common room. Although both wished to converse with their son, they were far too conscious of the other students, and reasoned that barreling into Gryffindor Tower would only put the humans on edge. Instead, they entrusted the responsibility to the others. Carlisle pressed a small vial into Alice's deceptively dainty hand. The only response she gave was a silent nod, before dashing back the way we'd come. I didn't have a chance to question it, before I was once again pulled onto a vampire's back. Unlike before, it was Jasper who carried me back up the stairs. Verlina was ready for us this time, but that didn't stop her from voicing her displeasure. It wasn't until I was separated from her canvas by 2 floors that the protestations of the scandalized virgin finally faded out. Jasper was more careful than his brother when we reached our destination, and evidently had considered the physics involved in vampire transportation. Rather than pulling to a sudden halt, he gradually decelerated, for which I was entirely grateful, glad that I didn't have to peel myself of the cold floor yet again. I was confident that large bruises would already be blooming across my ghostly skin if I received any more. My butt would probably look as if it had been sheathed in white and purple tie-dyed fabric. While the fat lady's portrait obstructed the entrance to Gryffindor, I could still discern the cacophonous shriek of the stair alarm, which was coupled with the sound of raucous activity as students streamed into the common room. That could only mean one thing: Edward had reached his target. The knowledge only served in intensifying my anger. To begin with, it had been simmering away in the pit of my belly, but it hadn't been unbearable now. On the other hand, it frothed and spat like boiling water spilling over the edge of a pan. When I imagined that one-dimensional bimbo fluttering her eyelashes at my man, all I could think about was marching into Gryffindor and ripping her a new one. "I am not sure how we're going to go about this," Alice said uneasily, providing a temporary distraction. "Simple," Rosalie grunted musically. "We storm in, hold him down, and force the anti-love drug down his throat until he snaps the hell out of it." That explained the vial. The vampire looked smug as she folded her arms. By the look on the faces of her husband and brother, they agreed with her. I did too, and it took everything I had not to cheer out woohoo and request a high five. "As much as I'd love that," Alice replied, "Edward is currently tangled in her tendrils. Murder equals expulsion. Murder equals expulsion." "So what?" said Emmett, while I continued my internal mantra. "So we'll end up hurting Remilda if we try to pull Edward away by force." "You're not doing a very good job of convincing me, Alice," Rosalie fired. "Why should we care if that little tramp gets hurt?" The psychic's palms flew up defensively. "Believe me, I want nothing more than an opportunity to wring her neck." She shot back. Her voice was layered with acidity and disgust, so much so that I couldn't help but believe her. "But a brawl wouldn't only endanger her, it would also put any other nearby humans at risk. There's a huge chance that we'd be kicked out for breaking the community's trust." I wanted to argue, but I had to acknowledge the logic in Alice's words. Emmett was the first to break the silence. He threw back his head and released a loud groan, before aiming a spiritless kick at the floor with the tip of his black boot. "What's the plan then?" I asked, my eyes flying about the group. Jasper sighed. "I suppose we'll just have to wait until he's alone. He can stay with Remilda every hour of the day. Maybe after she goes to sleep we'll to sleep. But that might not be for another 12 hours. I exclaimed. Jasper looked apologetic, but didn't offer an alternative. "Look," said Alice, "let's just see how it goes. I promise, Bella, the very second it's safe, we'll be on him like flies on meat." She patted my shoulder in gentle encouragement. Since there didn't seem to be any alternative, I nodded in irritated resignation. At the sound of the password, the fat lady swung forward to admit us, and I braced myself for what lay within. My eyes quickly processed the scene around me. Filtering through the uniformed crowd, Edward's pearly skin and stunning features soon attracted my gaze. My heart dropped in an instant, an automatic reaction to the sight of him entwined with another woman. I barely registered Remilda, because I couldn't get over the adoration smeared across Edward's face. His eyes, which had darkened to a deep emerald, smoldered as they caressed the form of the girl he held. Remilda looked equally enamored. Her fingers were splayed across his chest, and every now and then, a sickening giggle would pop through her lips. Edward grinned, his arms coiling around her waist, before he bent down to kiss Remilda on the cheek. I felt as if I was about to be sick. I wanted to flee the room to find the nearest toilet, but a wave of courage suddenly exploded up through my body, forcing my racing heart to calm itself. I glanced briefly to my left to smile at Jasper, who, in genuine concern, gave my shoulder a careful squeeze. "Are you all right?" I didn't reply until I knew I could answer truthfully, but once I was certain I could handle the sight of Edward and Remilda together, I nodded. And in all honesty, I was all right. To be sure, I was furious, but while the rational part of my brain continued to remind me that Edward was bewitched, that he was the one who finally needed to be rescued, I could deal. I was a woman on a mission, a woman on a quest. I would save the prince from the clutches of the evil queen, possibly slaying said evil queen in the process, and then the two of us, the prince and I, would live happily ever after. This had to happen. The natural order of fairy tales dictated it. Moreover, whilst Edward might be besotted with another girl, I perceived no sign of the reverence his face held the many times he had looked at me. On those occasions, he had made me feel like some kind of religious icon swathed in a giant halo of holy, white light, one staring down at a man whose eyes overflowed with wonder, a man who seemed to have discovered the meaning of life simply through being in my presence. I wasn't vain, of course. I didn't understand the reason behind the worshipful stares my fiancé had given me. I only knew their effect. The other students looked anxious when they realized the presence of the Cullens and myself. The room had been buzzing with talk about the new couple. According to Rosalie, there wasn't a student in the room who wasn't fully aware of the fact that Edward had consumed a love potion. The girls from my dorm had quickly spread the word in an attempt to preserve Edward's reputation. I sent a small smile of thanks in the direction of Hermione, Lavender, Ginny, and Parvati. Edward's icy glare traveled over our company as we made our approach. The crowds parted for us, and Remilda's friends, all of whom had initially surrounded the happy couple, cautiously edged away, looking fearful as they took in the enraged expressions of Edward's siblings. "Edward, Alice," he responded curtly. His sister's eyes snapped to Remilda, who quivered under the weight of her hot glare. "What do you want?" "We want you to acknowledge the fact that you're under a spell, Edward," Rosalie snapped impatiently, before pointing at the witch in her brother's arms. "Last night, she drugged you with a love potion." In response to the accusation, a caustic hiss burst through Edward's lips, and he pressed Remilda more firmly against his chest. "Lies. They aren't lies. If you don't believe us, why don't you hear it for yourself? Read her mind." "Because I don't have to," he barked. "I trust Remilda, and she's asked that I give her her privacy, which is what I intend to do." "That doesn't sound like you," Alice retorted, her voice clipped. "When did you ever give Bella her privacy back in Forks? All those times you spied on her in gym, even when she asked you not to." Edward's eyes connected with mine. Despite the brevity of his glance, I managed to discern the flash of confusion that whipped across his face. He must have been wondering what he'd ever seen in me. I'd asked myself that question more times than I could count, but I'd always received the same response. "You don't see yourself clearly." The memory of that phrase was my life jacket. It kept me afloat in the expanding sea of chaos and uncertainty. "Whatever I did back then is in the past," said Edward, staring down at Remilda. She had reclaimed his attention with a tug to his shirt. Although he was no longer looking in my direction, I knew those words had been meant for me as much as his siblings. Overcome with rage, I lost control of my tongue. "So what?" I demanded, glaring at the witch. "Now that you've shattered my future, since you obviously don't care about wrecking people's lives," Edward hissed, which stung, admittedly, but I ignored him and persevered. "What are you going to do next, Whatever do you mean, Bella?" Remilda asked, her voice sickly sweet as she flirtatiously ran a finger across the exposed flesh at Edward's collar, before moving lower over his chest and down to his abdomen. "Well, Edward wants a mate, but, of course, he's immortal. You're not. Are you going to let him bite you?" I deeply enjoyed the way Remilda blanched. She tried to form a response many times, but couldn't seem to get the words out. 3 whole days of searing agony, Rosalie sneered. "Every moment, wishing for death," Jasper continued. "So much so, you start to think you are dead," Emmett scowled, "burning in hell." "Enough," roared Edward. He was so furious with his siblings and me that he accidentally gripped Remilda with too much force. At her sudden yelp, his glare transformed into a mask of panic, and he subsequently showered her with sincere apologies. All the while, I was waiting for him to release his hold on her to give the Cullens the brief window they needed to jump him without causing injury, but it never happened. "Maybe you'll get lucky, Remilda," Rosalie snickered. "He might kill you first." The witch gawked at golden-haired vampire, but when Edward assured her that he knew of a way to make the transformation painless, she relaxed a little. Still, she didn't look convinced. She had clearly failed to consider the consequences of her little scheme. "I know the pain of transformation, Remilda," I said, tugging back my sleeve to reveal my half-moon scar, "and trust me, morphine doesn't work." 6 heads snapped in my direction simultaneously. I knew from experience that the drug was rendered completely ineffective by the creeping venom, but I had never revealed this to the Cullens. I had hoped that I'd be able to summon enough willpower to keep my mouth shut when the time finally came, as it was my intention to protect Edward to the best of my ability. There was no reason for him to suffer with me. My words provoked a scowl from Edward, which, again, I ignored. He wasn't in control. After promising Remilda that they'd find an alternative form of pain relief, and that they'd discuss his changing her later. The pair scuttled away, moving with the crowd towards the portrait hole. "Oh, and Bella," Edward called back over his shoulder, "I am going to need my mother's ring back. You can leave it on my bedside table. I'll collect it later." Remilda giggled, her anxieties now forgotten. With that, the witch and the vampire departed, disappearing out of Gryffindor Tower, amidst a throng of moving bodies. I couldn't help myself, the emotions tumbled out of me like water bursting through a dam. I broke down. The rest of the day was much the same, filled with fear and misery. I had no doubt that the Cullens would find a way sooner or later, like Jasper had said. They just needed to wait until there were no fragile humans around. The amount of trouble Edward could get into until then, however, could be massive. There was nothing to stop him from biting Remilda. And the things Remilda might do to him. I shuddered at the thought. After the confrontation in the common room, Emmett had carried me upstairs to the boys' dormitory. He'd laid me on Edward's bed, where he and the others had murmured gentle reassurances. Alice had reclined beside me, providing me with a shoulder to cry on. She had stroked my hair while her shirt had absorbed my tears. In an attempt to soothe me, Rosalie had sat on my other side, and had whispered in my ear every method of torture she could think of. Despite my tears, I laughed. Once I'd managed to get a grip, the Cullens led me out of Gryffindor Tower. Alice foresaw that Edward wouldn't be taking his regular classes. His growing obsession with Remilda meant that he couldn't bring himself to part with her, and so he escorted her about the school. Since there wasn't a lot he could get up under the watchful gaze of the teachers, the Cullens and I decided that we would resume Operation Antidote after lessons had finished for the day. I couldn't concentrate at all. Whenever a teacher would ask me a question, I would always give him or her the wrong answer, which was unusual for me. Esme and Carlisle must have filled them in that, or they simply overheard the gossiping students, because they all seemed to react sympathetically. Professor Flitwick slipped me a jolly bean in an attempt to cheer me up. The Australian candy was gaining popularity in Britain, but I couldn't bring myself to eat it. Instead, I slipped it into my pocket, resolving to savor it once the problem had been dealt with. At dinner time, I stared with longing at my vampire. Remilda was perched on his lap, her arms cast about his neck. When she rubbed her nose to his, I heaved. Luckily, my stomach was empty, so I didn't projectile vomit onto the rack of lamb in front of me. In my depressed state, I hadn't eaten a single thing all day, even though Hermione had filled my plate with minted potatoes and succulent-looking filet mignon. Despite her constant insistence that I should eat something, I couldn't manage it. My appetite had gone on vacation. Edward, too, it appeared, hadn't eaten. Nowadays, the Cullens generally kept to a diet of dragoness blood, but its nature meant that they could only consume a couple of goblets a day, unless they were willing to suffer a horrific hangover. While the magical blood kept the thirst at bay, they had to consume it every day to keep themselves sated. In his state of obsession, Edward had clearly neglected his diet. His eyes were darkening rapidly, his pupils almost indiscernible against the inky green of his irises. We sat at opposite ends of the table, but I watched him the whole time. At one point, Remilda caught me staring. She arched an eyebrow, and seemed to grow increasingly irritated when I refused to look away. My fingers clutched the edge of the table as she turned to whisper in Edward's ear. He smiled pleasantly back at her, and nodded his head, before rising from his place on the bench. Together, they marched across the length of the hall, hands swinging between them, and exited the room. I was so preoccupied with my own thoughts that I barely registered the way Alice's eyes suddenly glazed over. Without stopping to ask her about the vision, I jumped up from the table, possessed by an abrupt idea, and stalked after the harpy and my yet-to-be-rescued fiancé. "Bella, wait!" cried Emmett, who was hushed shortly afterwards by his psychic sister. "Let her go, Em. But, trust me." The heads of the students turned to me as I raced from the room. The Slytherins jeered and hooted as I left, but I had bigger fish to fry than those lowlifes. Remilda led Edward to a deserted corridor on the third floor. I kept a careful distance. With his acute senses, I accepted the unlikeliness of Edward failing to realize my proximity, not that I let that stop me. He didn't give any indication of having sensed my nearness, but that was probably because he was too wrapped up in Remilda. "It's just you me now," she purred, allowing Edward to press her against the wall. In the dim light of the corridor, my human eyes could only make out a pair of silhouettes, but that was enough. I caught every movement, understood every touch. I held my breath as Edward slowly lowered his head to Romita S, my heart accelerating with every passing second, until I could no longer stand by and watch. In one moment of pure, surging adrenaline, I snatched the wand from the depths of my pocket, and aimed it determinedly at my delicate, waiting flesh. I barely noticed the pain, even though it ripped down my arm like an electric current, hot and sharp. My every thought was riveted on the godlike creature standing down the corridor. A gust of air breezed in through an open window, gently rustling my unpinned hair. Edward flinched, his whole body suddenly turning rigid. My heart, meanwhile, began hammering out a frenzied rhythm against my ribcage. It echoed in my ears as Edward steadily, yet purposefully, extricated himself from that deceitful cretin, whom I wanted nothing more than to beat to a bloody pulp. Hope fluttered in my chest as my bewitched fiancé slowly turned. It was the scent of my blood, irresistible to him as it was, which had prevented the kiss. Whatever trick magic could play on his emotions, there was no potion in existence potent enough to confuse his most basic, carnal desires, for which I was exceedingly grateful. No blood smelled sweeter to Edward than mine, and for one brief, glorious moment, I rejoiced in the fact that not Romilda Vane, or any other for that matter, was his singer. That was until I saw his eyes. Like a meteor tearing through the ozone, or lead plunging through water, my heart dropped. The pulse in my neck and temples set my skin flaring. Heat rippled over my cheeks, my throat, my chest, turning my upper body what must have been an appetizing shade of pink. The air undulated in my heaving lungs, but rather than provide some measure of relief, it was rendered completely ineffective, thanks to the building terror inspired by the ravenous gaze of the vampire. In that moment, that was precisely what Edward was, a vampire, the ultimate predator, and I was his prey. As he took his first step in my direction, his lips pulled back into a smile oozing sex and sin. Goose flesh covered my arms, while the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I stepped backwards automatically. For some reason, the vampire found this amusing, his mouth twitching at the corners. "Hello, Isabella," he purred, the texture of his voice even closer to velvet than usual. I tried to answer, but my mouth was as dry as a desert. A not-so-subtle gulp caught in my throat as he continued to edge towards me. At the signs of my fear, he gave another low chuckle. I said hello. When someone greets you, Isabella, it's polite to respond. Hi, I stuttered, almost stumbling as I took another step back. Further down the corridor, Romilda stood rooted to the spot, her frightened eyes snapping from the crimson trickle at my arm to Edward, and back again. That's right, I wanted to scream at her, "I am going to die, and it's all your fault." I hoped the guilt would drive her to do something stupid, like jumping off a cliff, anything to keep her away from Edward. I almost wanted to laugh out loud. There I was, an inch from death, and all I could concentrate on was the jealousy bubbling in my blood. "Where are you going, Isabella?" Edward questioned silkily, demanding my attention. There was no disapproval in his voice. If anything, I think he hoped that I would run. The hunt would give him the thrill he craved. "Edward, please, what, please, stop. Why you don't want to do this?" "Oh, don't I?" he mocked. Light from the burning wall torches glinted off his brilliant teeth as he smirked. "On the contrary, I think you'll find that I really do. Your blood is irresistible, Bella, and I am tired of fighting it." Only once before had I ever seen him like this, the first time I had sat beside him in the biology lab, but, even then, he had found a way to fight the longing awakened by my blood, whereas now that desire was completely unrestrained. Edward had every intention of satisfying it. His nostrils flared abruptly as he inhaled my scent, and I could tell by the way he closed his eyes that he was savoring it, anticipating the moment when his teeth would perforate my skin. He licked his lips. On any other occasion, that sight would have given birth to a flood of desire. Tonight, however, it only served in heightening my fear. A perpendicular passageway, which led to a narrow, circular staircase, joined the corridor at its midpoint. If I continued on my current path, I would eventually meet a dead end. On the other hand, the stairs would be difficult to navigate whilst traveling backwards. If Edward didn't kill me first, I'd probably fall and break my neck. Still, There was no alternative, and so I carefully backed my way around the corner, all the while maintaining eye contact with the stalking vampire. He followed me silently, his feet producing no discernible sound as they connected with the hard floor, unlike my own. "You're under a spell," I told him. "This isn't the real Edward." This time, rather than the gloating smile, a contemptuous sneer crept onto his face. His black eyes remained fixed on me. "Stupid girl," he spat, "how very wrong you are." I flinched, stopping short in the middle of the corridor. Edward continued towards me, his expression calm and unapologetic following the cruel remark. Moisture gathered at the corners of my eyes. Never before had my once devoted fiancé spoken to me in such a way. Even during arguments and disputes, I had always been able to perceive the adoration swimming beneath the thin layer of negativity. Not anymore. It was true with every fiber of my being. I clutched to the knowledge that Edward's current behavior was all a product of Romilda's selfish magic, but even that awareness wasn't enough to remove the pain I felt, or prevent the tears from leaking down my face. Edward arched an eyebrow and took another step forward. I didn't react. I was too distraught to care about what might happen to me. All I wanted now was to be close to him, and since this was the only way to achieve that, there seemed little point in running. Besides, I wasn't fast enough to escape a vampire. It would be pointless to try. I closed my eyes. My heart continued to panic like an animal trapped inside a cage, threatening to send me into cardiac arrest. After a few deep breaths, however, I put all my energy and focus into finding my happy place. Like film projected onto a blank screen, comforting images erupted suddenly through my mind. Edward and me in the meadow, our first kiss, the night he'd asked me to marry him, the look he'd worn the moment I'd said yes. I sighed. If these were to be the last moments of my life, I was grateful that I at least had happy memories to fill them with. Perhaps I was acting on some self-preserving instinct. Perhaps I hoped that there was still a chance of dissuading the vampire from his deadly pursuit, because, without giving much thought to it, I flung open my mind to him, intent on sharing those final seconds with the man I loved, the man who was about to murder me in order to satisfy his own burning thirst. His fingertips ghosted over my cheekbones, so gently that I could almost pretend he had approached me for another reason entirely. With his touch came memories from our time in Forks, when he had caressed my face as we stood outside the gym. "That was a long time ago," he murmured softly. "Things change. Not for vampires," I whispered, my eyes snapping open. "That's what you told me. You said that change was permanent for your kind, that a vampire falls in love once, and doesn't fall out." Despite the icy temperature of his skin, his touch left a burning trail as it gently followed the line of my jaw, moving down my neck, past the hollow at the base of my throat, and along my collarbone. "I was wrong," he said. I shivered as he took a step closer, one arm ensnaring my waist, while the other continued its exploration. His body was firmly pressed against mine now. I could feel every contour of his diamond-hard chest as he towered over me. When I felt his wintry breath wash against my face, my eyes automatically flashed open. Once again, I was left breathless by the vision of the creature before me. His beauty was unparalleled and absolute. There was nothing in the world to equal it. The moonlight washing in through the nearest arched window framed his face with an ethereal glow as it reflected off his alabaster skin. The subtle aura provided the perfect balance for his black irises and the shadows beneath his eyes. He could have been an angel, a dark angel, granted, but an angel nonetheless. His nose skimmed my neck as he lowered his head to my throat. My fingers found his hair, weaving their way through the bronze of their own accord. Every nerve in my body was on high alert, crackling like live wires. A few seconds later, when I felt Edward's tongue dance across my skin, I couldn't help but sigh. He'd been right when he'd told me my reactions were always backwards. That last thought elicited another soft chuckle. His lips parted against my flesh as he prepared to bite through the delicate membrane. There I was, about to die, and all I could think about was the way his arms were wound about me, and his delicious immortal perfume. My only regret was that this was as good as it would get. I would never get to experience the one thing I'd wanted the most. My eyes flashed wide, an automatic reaction to the sudden rush of internal cogs. "Stop." Edward froze at my command. I gulped, my heart flying once more into a sudden frenzy. I had no idea whether or not the vampire would agree to the idea taking shape in my head, but I was determined to plead my case. By this point, I really didn't care whether or not I would come across as desperate. I was about to die for heaven's sake. Why shouldn't I voice my last request? Isabella, Edward warned sternly. Without loosening his grip, he pulled back slightly. Please, I begged. My heart sank when he shook his head. I love Romilda. The words were like a dagger plunging into my chest. Somehow, though, I managed to ignore the pain. I absolutely refused to give in. By the hungry look in his eyes, I guessed that Edward was still intent on drinking my blood, but even if his guilt were minuscule, it was still enough that he chose to stop and listen. "You're going to kill me to take away my life. Shouldn't you at least give me this?" A frown darkened the vampire's countenance. "And betray Romilda, surely that should be the last thing to matter." "I am about to be murdered, Edward," I repeated, stressing each word. "By you. For my blood, I think I deserve payment." My shield came slamming down like steel shutters, protecting my thoughts from intrusion. I wanted some privacy as I pondered my last statement. What the hell was I doing? I sounded insane. In fact, I sounded like a common prostitute, or was it the other way round? Considering what I was asking of Edward, if he agreed, wouldn't he be the one selling his body? Selling his body in return for a means to live? How bizarre. A myriad of emotions played across his face: doubt, guilt, fear, desire, all were present as he warred with his conscience. "You're right," he said eventually. My heart leapt in my chest, thumping into elated overdrive. "But Romilda, doesn't he have to know?" I interrupted. "I am not going to be around to tell her after all." Edward nodded. As the seconds passed, his expression became more and more resolved, until finally, he was leading me out of the corridor, his hand laced with mine. He stopped before the door of an unused classroom. After pushing it open, he scooped me up off the ground, and carried me bridal style over the threshold. Once again, crisp, white moonlight streamed in from outside. Desks and chairs were stacked in one corner of the empty room, but it otherwise remained completely unoccupied. Because we had no bed and no blanket, Edward didn't object when I removed my wand from my pocket and cast a thermal charm. Instead, he watched in silence from across the room as I performed the magic. Under his obsidian gaze, I shivered with pleasure. Everything about Edward was intense as he made his approach. Without a word, he laid a palm on the flat of my stomach, asserting the lightest pressure until I was pressed up against the classroom wall. My breath came and went in shallow gasps as my fingers found their way inside his robes. The black garment fell to the floor, and was joined shortly afterwards by my own. A loud feminine moan filled the room as Edward crushed his lips to mine. There was nothing careful about him now. Instead, his movements and actions rang with urgency. The kiss was electric, almost agonizing in its intensity. I was so involved in the way our lips attacked one another's that I didn't even realize when Edward's hands expertly moved from one button to the next. I was still fumbling with the second one on his shirt when he finished unfastening my blouse. The white cotton fell away as he pushed it back off my shoulders, exposing the pale planes of my chest and arms. "Christ, Bella," I inhaled sharply at his words. Desire surged through my body, white-hot and all-consuming, threatening to raise every morsel of tissue to ash. Edward's eyes, similarly, smoldered with lust, but I couldn't tell whether that was still a result of my self-inflicted wound, or whether I was slowly but surely awakening the real Edward. Maybe he was simply pretending for my benefit, but it really didn't seem that way to me. Whatever the reason, he was clearly impatient, because he wasn't prepared to wait for me to finish unfastening his shirt. He ripped it open himself, sending buttons flying in every direction. My back connected forcefully with the wall as Edward crashed back against me, his upper body now completely stripped. The collision left a throbbing ache in my shoulders. I almost had to bite my lip against the pain, but the ultimate distraction came in the form of the vampire's mouth, which smothered the potential for a groan of discomfort. A charged growl vibrated up from his chest as I traced his mouth with my tongue. My need seemed to fuel Edward's as oil would nourish fire, because his large masculine hands suddenly loosened their tight hold on my hips, and began moving towards a new destination. As they traveled up and over my ribcage, I hastily flung open my mind. "Hold me tighter," I pleaded, feeling as if I might die if he didn't. The vampire's breathing matched my own. Although he didn't need the air, excitement had his chest rising and falling with increased speed. At my encouragement, he increased the pressure of his touch, pressing me tighter to the wall. Even then, he still wasn't close enough for my liking. I gasped loudly as he nudged my legs apart with his thigh. My fingers feverishly grabbed at his hair, whilst his danced at the edge of my lacy, white bra. I shivered with anticipation, and inhaled the delicious lilac sunshine scent that fanned across my face when he exhaled. "Bella," he growled in a voice rugged with desire. My heart thudded. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even think. His hands were driving me to the edge of insanity as they traced over the thin layer of fabric. A desperate whimper was the only noise my mouth could form. It possessed an almost haunting quality as it filled the silvery night, disturbing the quiet like a wraith. Finally, Edward's cool fingers finally slinked beneath my bra. Total, utter bliss. I threw my head back in rapture. The feeling of his skin against mine was indescribable. Over and over, he teased, stroked, and massaged my flesh, and over I tried to tell him not to stop, but my tongue couldn't wrap itself properly around the words I wanted to communicate. My mind screamed in protest when his right hand stopped its ministrations and slipped away. "Nah, SSH, he soothed, when I tried to halt his withdrawal. He ran his lips along my jaw, placing kisses here and there, working his way to my ear, which he flicked with his tongue. I jerked against his palm when I suddenly felt his hand press against me through my skirt. A burst of euphoric color exploded behind my eyes as they rolled back into my head. How had I ever gone without this? For so long, I'd craved had been starved of, even the sensation Edward was currently bringing me, and now that I had it, I didn't want it to end. But an ending was inevitable. I had no intention of darkening the moment with thoughts of my impending doom, nor did I want my emotions to infect Edward I would never experience this again, and that thought saddened me beyond belief, which was why I brought my mental defenses slamming down once more. With the thoughts of my approaching demise contained, there was less chance that the vampire would get distracted. Anything else would probably have excited him far too much, and I wasn't quite ready to die yet. "More, please, more," I begged, diving back into the euphoria. Edward hissed, the sound laced with hunger. He kissed me greedily, his hand snatching at the waist of my skirt. The discordant tearing of fabric ripped through the air, while the vampire sucked on my lower lip. I could hardly believe that he was as inexperienced in this territory as I was. He seemed to know precisely what to do to set every neuron in my body fizzing with heat. My gray woolen tights were the next casualty, leaving nothing but a thin layer of white lace to protect my virtue. Suddenly, I was being lifted off the floor, my weight supported by Edward's muscular arms as he propped me against the wall. "I still want you," he growled against my ear. His voice was low and throaty as he made the admission, and I detected a glimmer of surprise as I stared into the flat black of his eyes. "I shouldn't still want you, but I do. I want you too," I moaned, teetering on the edge of madness as he stroked me through the lacy barrier. I felt ravenous as I laid my fiery kisses across his neck. Every cell in my body was alive, thrumming with burning energy. I grasped at his shoulder blades as he unbuttoned his trousers, and was so overwhelmed by Edward's sudden abandon that I almost failed to notice the tiny creature hovering behind him, who was apparently trying to capture my attention. I felt my brow knit with confusion, and squinted against the darkness, convinced that I was seeing things. The more I concentrated, however, the more I was sure it wasn't my imagination. Seated on a bumblebee, little more than a meter away, was an Abattoir fairy, waving above her head what appeared to be a minute silver decanter. She pointed to my crimson wound, her brown eyes wide and imploring. The honesty was plain on her face, which was probably why I decided to trust her so implicitly. In a subtle movement, I twisted my arm outward, and placed another kiss on Edward's neck. I felt his icy breath against my throat, and shivered. "Bella," he whispered, sweeping back my hair. The fairy, meanwhile, urged her insect forwards. It surprised me that I couldn't hear a buzzing noise, considering how many times the Cullens had mentioned it previously. Why didn't Edward notice it now? After uncorking her flask, the Abattoir fairy carefully drizzled warm scarlet liquid down my arm. I had seen similar magic on numerous occasions, but I was still surprised by how much fluid the tiny decanter contained. All of a sudden, Edward went completely rigid. My heart pounded in my chest as the fairy flew away. Although I had no clue of her intention, I knew in my gut that it was imperative she remained unseen by the vampire. He couldn't know what had just transpired. His nostrils flared again as he pulled away, and his gaze dropped swiftly to my arm. I winced as he snatched it up, not out of pain exactly. I was more surprised than anything. "You smell off," he remarked abruptly, no kindness in his voice now as he sniffed my arm. In the last few minutes, I had watched the real Edward push his way closer and closer to the surface with this new distraction. However, the cold face of the predator came rushing back. I could see it in the flat black of his eyes, and I immediately felt stupid for naively putting my faith in a fairy I knew nothing about. "What? You smell off," he enunciated again, eyes distrustful. "What have you done, Bella?" I blinked at the accusation. Edward had once told me I'd make a terrible actress. I couldn't afford to prove him right. I haven't done anything. I've been right here. Don't talk too much, Bella, otherwise you'll give yourself away. Edward tapped my arm impatiently with his right index finger. "This blood isn't yours. It doesn't smell anything like you. Are you trying to distract me?" I fired, opting for a new approach. That threw him. Doubt filled his eyes as they flicked from my arm to my face, and back again. "Something's not right," he murmured to himself with a shake of his head. Cautiously, he mopped up the blood with his finger. A deep furrow disturbed the smooth skin between his obsidian eyes as he lifted it to his nose. After one long sniff, he released another loud moan of hunger. Whatever the nature of the mystery liquid, it was still mixed with the scent of my blood, certainly enough to tempt Edward. I forced my expression to remain blank as he inserted his fingers into his mouth. He greedily sucked away the crimson substance, closing his eyes as he savored the taste. The pulse raged on beneath my skin, sending the blood crashing through my veins. Either I would die in the next few seconds, or I wouldn't. I was unprepared for the look I perceived in Edward's eyes when they next flashed open. Bella, I'd never seen him look so confused in all the time that I'd known him. His head snapped in the direction of the door and back again, before he allowed his eyes to trail down the length of my body. "I love you." Hope exploded inside me like a firework. "But Remilda," and fizzled out in the next second. The potion was still in effect then, but something had definitely changed in Edward. The spell still had its hold on him, but its grip had loosened. Acting on instinct, I thrust my arm up to his mouth. "Drink." Edward looked horrified. "What?" "The blood on my arm," I answered urgently, begging him with my eyes. "Drink it. Please, Edward." Despite his confusion, Edward did as I asked, one hand gently taking hold of my wrist, while he used the other to cup my elbow. He inhaled the scent of the blood, before running his tongue along my arm. His eyes snapped open as he reached the crook of my elbow, more doubt visible now in his dark eyes. Without a word, he continued to lap up as much of the fluid as possible, becoming more and more feverish in his movements as the seconds passed. Finally, when the last trace of blood had been removed, my fiancé stumbled back, giving me the first glimpse of his face. At the sight of Edward's expression, I gasped in absolute shock. He was livid. In those next few moments, he was rage personified. Snarl after snarl erupted from his lips as his chest rapidly rose and fell. Without warning, his fist suddenly connected with the wall, smashing through the top layer of stone. Debris collected on the floor by our feet, while a cloud of dust swirled through the air, forming a chalky bubble which engulfed the pair of us. I didn't even dare breathe. Edward's flawless control had made him skilled in concealing his emotions, so it was a rare occurrence to see such an expression appear on his face. When I had witnessed it in the past, however, it had usually preceded serious physical injury, or worse, a bloody death. This is it, I thought, bracing myself against the wall. He's going to kill me. Edward surprised me, however, and reached down to swipe my robes of the floor, which he then draped around my shoulders. His lips pulled back into another ferocious snarl, revealing two perfect sets of venom-coated teeth. "Edward, what's going on?" He didn't answer, even when I asked a second time, and, instead, about-faced, before marching determinedly towards the door. I squeaked in surprise as the rest of the Cullens came crashing through, and wound the robes tighter about my frame as heat pooled in my cheeks. Alice danced immediately to her brother's side, and handed him a vial filled with more crimson liquid. To counter any remaining effects, she said simply. She, like her brother, looked extremely pissed. Edward snatched it from her, and drank without question. He glugged it down as if parched, and didn't stop until he consumed every last drop. When nothing remained of the potion, his fingers crushed the vial to pieces, its shards subsequently raining down and clinking against the floor. Carlyle stepped forwards, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. Edward growled fiercely and shook it off. Now, Edward, don't you dare! Edward bellowed with bared teeth, his eyes hysterical as he turned to face his father. Because of that selfish, little slut, I almost destroyed the most important thing in my life. I am not angry, Carlyle. I am goddamn irate. I understand that, but Carlyle's words fell on deaf ears though, because Edward was too busy stomping from the room. He was so furious that he ripped the door of its hinges. I couldn't make sense of anything that was happening, and stared on in absolute shock as Emmett, Jasper, Alice, Rosalie, and Carlyle marched on after him. Only Esme stayed behind. In a blur of silvery white, she flitted to my side, startling me from my astonishment. Sorry, dear, she said sincerely, noting my surprise. Only then did I notice the bag she carried. After fishing out a handful of garments, she quickly offered them to me, before turning away to give me some privacy. What just happened, Esme? I asked, hurriedly stepping into a pair of jeans. She heaved a sigh, and ran a hand through her unpinned caramel hair. Alice foresaw that Edward would hurt you if he heard us coming, so he enlisted the help of the Abattoir fairy in exchange for diamonds. She's been tailing Alice and Rosalie for the last 2 days, eyeing their bracelets and necklaces. Their jewelry was the only thing keeping her here. We gave her half earlier, and promised to return the rest of the diamonds after she helped us. No doubt I'll be seeing her later. Okay, so that made sense. What then? McGonagall cast a charm on her to muffle the sound of her bumblebee, and since Edward can barely hear the thoughts of fairies, he had no way of knowing she was there. And that liquid she tipped onto my arm. An antidote to the love potion. She couldn't carry enough to completely dispel the effects though, which was why we brought more once Edward was sane enough to let us near. I nodded, before pulling a beige sweater over my head. And where is he going now? I pressed, fearing I already knew the answer. As much as I felt like strangling Romilda, I didn't actually want her harmed, not really. It was not in Edward's normal chivalrous character to use the language he had when discussing a female, and despite my anger, I was seriously frightened about what he would do to the girl who had caused us so much trouble. Esme spun back to me. She wore an expression that clearly said you already know the answer to that. Come on, climb on my back. If anyone stands a chance of calming him down, it's you. I don't think even Jasper will be able to do much after what's happened. After packing up my discarded uniform, I did as Esme instructed and jumped onto her back. A ruffled McGonagall came running through the door not a second later, red-faced and out of breath, followed closely by Professor Folkloom and Slughorn. What happened? Puffed the head mistress, one hand fluttering at her chest as she leant against the doorframe. In a rush to join the others, Esme speedily summarized the previous 5 minutes. I doubted that the teachers understood half of it, for the vampire spoke too quickly, most of her words blurring together. Sorry, Minerva, have to run. And that was that. Esme tore out of the classroom and down the corridors of Hogwarts like a homing missile. I had to bury my face against her neck to avoid the windburn that accompanied her speed. Oh no, she murmured, after we made it onto the grand staircase. My heart stuttered in its cage. What? Romilda just left the girls' dormitory. She was getting changed, but now she's run straight into Edward. He was waiting for her with the others in the common room. It's busy. He's going to make a scene. Esme, run faster. There's just no rest for the wicked. We will continue in next part.